Go live! Go live! Go live! Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Ooh, I've shrunk. I'm big again! Hello! That's probably a leftover from when I was doing a Twitch stream earlier. Which hasn't, for some reason, saved, so no one can go watch it. But I did do one, because I was testing out Twitch to check if it would work in case any issue ever came up with YouTube. Hello, HMS Verdun. Hello, Steve Clarke. Hello, Carvagers. Michael Cooch. That's an excellent story of HMS Rodney and taking on a Klingon battlecruiser. My sincere suspicion with HMS Rodney versus a battlecruiser, D7 battlecruiser, is whilst Rodney actually might beat HMS Nelson, I had this feeling she wouldn't win versus Rodney. It's kind of like if it was against Queen Elizabeth or Valiant or Malaya or Barham, I'd probably put money on the Klingon battlecruiser. But if it was Warspite, I put money on Warspite and possibly on the Klingon battlecruiser, ending up with its, quite a lot of its parts taken off and attached onto Warspite afterwards as war trophies. Hello, Night 6 everyone. Hello, Calvin Ghostmode. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Albert Susky. Hello. Ooh. Good lord. Hello, Peter Dawson. And for anyone who thinks I've got the sniffles or anything, I have no idea why occasionally I'm sneezing, but I am. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, HMS Verdun. Hello, Wayne's World. Hello, Sonic Canero. Hello, DGB40. Hello, Byron Ewan. Hello, Frame 15. Too loud. Okay. Hello, Felix B. I've actually upset Rue. Sorry, Tanif. I didn't mean to upset. I didn't mean to upset Rue with my caterwauling. Hello, Nighthawk Productions. How problematic would it be? This is from Night 681. Would it be if they, because the UK proceeded with the Commonwealth FTA, cancelled the UK-US loan agreement and withheld martial aid? Something different to do? If the Commonwealth Free Trade Area had been brought into existence, Britain didn't get much of martial aid. This is one of the things. The martial aid, Britain got other things, not martial aid. Martial aid was mostly aimed at continental Europe, which had been absolutely whacked by a war being fought over it. And martial aid was mainly being targeted on countries which were in Europe, which they were considered were potential threats for a communist takeover. So, honestly, let's put it this way. For starters, if the Commonwealth Free Trade Agreement had gone through, and there had been a Commonwealth Free Trade Agreement, etc., I don't think the US would have been that annoyed with it, because it would have been another thing for stabilising countries which could be potential targets of communist takeover. So the Americans wouldn't be too objectionable to that, and the Americans kind of like free trade areas. What they might do is might want to be included in the Commonwealth Free Trade Area. So you might see, from its inception, a thing like, I don't know, nations being allowed to sit as with special, special exigencies or something. What would they describe? You're going to give them, but they're not going to accord to the Commonwealth rules of having the Queen as the head of state. And they're different sovereign nations. Guest membership. Maybe there might be special membership of the Commonwealth Free Trade Association was given to America on those rules. There'll be something done. How's Switzerland, Felix B? Hope you're enjoying it. George Newman, good morning, afternoon, evening, night, depending on your time zone. Yes, for me it's now 7 o'clock in the evening. Did you hear that apparently War Thunder had 3 classified document leaks this weekend? Glenn, that really doesn't surprise me. Also, I've decided what I'm going to be doing for the 100th episode of Bruships. I'm going to do it as a sci-fi one because I'm spending the whole week, I try and do every week, try and sort of balance things through the various interests. And this week is looking at like a lot of solid naval interest, naval stuff, including, interestingly of course, the Australia's first fleet, the founding fleet. And yeah. It's interesting to sort of, I thought sci-fi might be appropriate for Bruships 100 at that point. Germany got a lot of, West Germany got a lot of martial aid, yes. Hello, Andrew Cox. Just to give an example of how stable the Buccaneer was in flight, a pilot once ejected due to his gauges giving false readings, and the thing flew in a stable position until it ran out of fuel and crash landed itself. Left a Buccaneer-shaped hole in a patch of trees, and the aircraft only broke up into 3 major sections. Very solidly built plane. Alex, have you tried playing the digital combat simulator? No, I don't think I've played a DCS. I might have played some version of DCS. Have you brought a car from the Arnold car global at all? Because they have a massive customer data leak. No. No, I haven't bought it from them, the Arnold car group. Right then. Yeah, I have to say, I'm having a fun weekend because we've got a lot of stuff going through at the moment, and there's a reason I'm taking my time getting into books. I do realise Drac is also live right at this moment, and I hope he's having a fun stream. I'm sure he is. But no, we were having a long chat with the Canadian Naval History crew, and basically watched this space because there are all sorts of plans afoot, and it's going to be fun. It's all going to be dependent upon all of you, again, for it to work, but it's going to be done. Just look, didn't an East German eject, but the Mickey was flying went on to crash in Belgium? I remember something about that. Let me just check. Mick crash Belgium. Oh yeah, 1989. A MiG-23 crashed in Belgium. The pilot ejected over Kołobrzeg, Poland, after experiencing technical problems, but the aircraft had continued flying for 900 kilometers before running out of fuel and hitting the ground. The Belgian government actually made a formal protest to the Soviet Union for the lack of notification about the stray aircraft. Oh. Ooh. It killed an 18-year-old resident. That's not that good. That's not good. It crashed into a house near Korchik. There are a lot of aviation incidents in 1989. It was not a good year for aircraft. Let's just check out 1987. 1987 was a better year for aircraft. That is a good thing. That is a good thing. I always worry about the omens. Right. Paul Woodage is also live right now. So the world has a lot of live history at the moment. That's good. That is a very good thing. Who is this drag person you're talking about? All naval history is political history? Well, basically, today we're starting off with some very interesting books. Nice turn. From what I understand, the Americans were against the Commonwealth Free Trade Agreement because it was a free trade area because it was a threat to their industries. Not really. The Americans weren't keen on a free trade area for the Commonwealth, mainly because they thought that was going. The Americans weren't really taking any notice of that. They thought that was another excuse to try and keep the empire going for longer. And a lot of Americans wanted the empire to be just broken up as quickly as possible and not be an empire, because they saw that as the biggest threat for communism. And I can see their view on that one, but honestly, when you break up an empire, the trouble is, what if you tend to invest in the local area, and this is the fault of an empire, but also they're the only ones who can possibly rectify this issue. You tend to have strengthened the police, you tend to have strengthened the judiciary, potentially, and the local army. You don't tend to strengthen the things which tend to counterbalance those forces in terms of maintaining a democracy. And of course, saying that is of something they overlooked would be suggesting that perhaps the Americans felt that democracy was a suitable government for those areas of former empire, which is a whole nother debate, because there is some very interesting things going around in the 1950s with American views as to former African colonies of various of the imperial powers. So we have water, but because this is Bruships, we also need iron bro. Still limited to 2 cans. I need to fill that up later, but let's get the can out. 1901, of course. And much better for me than mince pies, so those go away. Yeah, I do love it. There are certain family members who, if I tell them I am at all dieting, just start turning up with cakes the whole time, as if that's what you eat when you're dieting. Cold War was wild. Oh, it was. The Cold War was, how do I put this politely? It provided a lot of excuses for a lot of things. And that's the main problem with the Cold War. A lot of things could be got away with on the basis that it was because of the Cold War. And this was, therefore, problematic. It's also, I would say, pretty darn cold for the UK at the moment. Ouch. Lots of discussions of various doomed Soviet aircraft going on in the chat. Democracy is easy to describe, but hard to properly build. Yes. It's that's not cold. For the UK, that is cold. No, hold on. See, I admit the US had a rather simplistic us or them mentality, which cost us in many areas. I'd say it's not even us or them mentality. It's very much a right and wrong, black and white mentality of 1-0, binary, rather than the full spectrum it should be. Switzerland not the only full democracy in the world. Not quite. There's a fair number of other democracies around. But there's different types of democracy, etc. Representative versus direct, and yeah, it's an interesting time. So, that brings us to the first book of today. The Pilgrims Society and Public Diplomacy, 1895 to 1945. Please note, there is a link down to this society down below. You can go and find details about it. They even have the ability for you to join. Although you do need to first make contact with them and find someone to sponsor you to join, because you need to have a sponsor from within who's basically vetted that you are actually who you say you are and what you want to do. This book is by Bowman, and it's about one of the least talked about areas of diplomacy. The amount of I have to deal with on a regular basis, people saying, "Oh, America and Britain were going to go to war with each other." No. Britain and America had already done that. They did that in 1812. They didn't want to do it again. Or rather, no one sensible wanted to do it again. Yes, you will always have people on the fringes going, "Yes, this is a great idea." Secretary of State Seward, during the American Civil War, who believed that starting a war with Britain would unify the country. Thankfully, Lincoln looked and went, "No, all that will do is give the South the support of the Royal Navy, which is the one thing we don't want them to have." So, the thing was, there have been many ups and downs. There have been many political intrigues between Britain and America. But, and I say this nicely, the risk of war is consistently overstated, mostly because of the work of this group, the Pilgrim Society. They are the people who deal with trying to build a closer relationship between America and Britain. And they work very, very hard. The thing was, you always hear about, because of the IRA and the various links to Sinn Féin, etc., you hear about the Irish-American relations. You hear about, because of World War I, World War II, and the fact that they were fighting Germany, the German-American relations and the various pro-German factions. You even do hear about, to an extent, the Soviet connections and the Japanese connections, because, again, they are opponents of wars. You very rarely hear about, in the popular histories and discussions, much discussion of the Anglo-American societies and the relations they fostered. Why? Because they were the allies. So, of course, most people quite happily write it off and go, "Oh, of course they had this support because they were the ones who were already on the good side." They forget the amount of work that has to go in to build the relationships which do actually keep this going. And that is the thing. America and Britain do not always agree. But our interests usually are similar enough, and even when they diverge, are not so different as to mean that going to war with each other is a sensible idea or a logical position. Especially after 1895. And the way this works is by getting people in the room and talking. That is how the British and American diplomacy has always been. Not just the private diplomacy between ambassadors and governments and ministers, but diplomacy at all sorts of levels. And this focuses on public diplomacy. How you get the cultures to talk to each other. That is what this is about. Works of organisations like this, which is why to this day you see so many British actors and actresses on American television. Why you see so many American television programmes broadcast in the UK. Yeah. Britain's not been falling apart, falling apart politically or economically over the last few years. We've been having tempestuous time. And there are changes going through. But no, we're not falling apart. And honestly, it annoys. Sometimes when people turn around and say that, I sort of going, are we still being quite important, still moving around and taking lead and doing things we're supposed to be doing as Britain? Yes. Are we doing it the same way we used to? No. But it would be far worse. It would have been far worse and far more terrible if, well, if you hadn't followed through with what was promised. Far worse. Because that would have meant that you could ignore any election result. And that's part of the problem. That's, I have to say, some of the things of the last few years. The amount of people who've been willing to say Britain should ignore results of elections which they don't like has really worried me. But we'll leave that to one side. I need to get a pistol and a CC permit so I can go to the opera and not turn my daughter into Batman. could see your daughter turning into Batman. I could see her doing that, Paul. The amount of stuff you have done with her. Yeah, definitely. Hi, Richards. So, let's talk about the founding of the society. The Pilgrim Society's functions were extravagant and colourful affairs, stereotypical of the excess of the upper class Edwardian Britain and Gilded Age America. The New York Times in 1907 reported from one such society dinner, describing the grand ballroom of New York's prestigious Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where the event was being held, as lavishly decorated with American and British flags. Then, following an event in 1909, the walls of the same venue were described as bedecked by two clasped hands, outlined in electric lights, and over them an arrangement of electric bulbs spelled "Hands Across the Sea." It's lovely. That's 1909, but anyway. The gold epaulets and gold lace which adorned the military uniforms of some of the 500 guests glittered in the glare of the lights and almost all of the 50 tables. Sometimes the decorations chosen for the society events had symbolic significance. For example, on one occasion when tables were embellished by sprays of trailing arbutus, chosen because they were the species of plant that had purportedly been the first flower encountered by the Pilgrim Fathers when they landed at Plymouth Rock in the 17th century. While official histories of the Pilgrim Society claim that the club did not take its name from the Pilgrim Fathers, the society was evidently prepared to evoke the spirit of America's early modern English and European settlers. It is noteworthy, for example, that the London branch utilised what was called the Mayflower Room in the Hotel Victoria, a room named after both the Pilgrim Fathers' ship and the Trailing Arbutus. The Trailing Arbutus is also called the Mayflower, due to this connection with the 17th century Pilgrims. Such sentiments concerning the Pilgrim Fathers were consistent with what Joseph Conforti had termed a new politicised meaning to the word pilgrim, which emerged in the early 19th century. Largely distinct from religious connotations, Pilgrim and the Pilgrim Fathers connoted the pioneering status of New England's founders. The old comers were now imagined as the pioneers of civil and religious liberty in America. This is what James Sheffield, the US ambassador to Mexico, meant when he, at the Pilgrim Society 25th anniversary dinner in 1928, spoke of the fundamental principles of government, which the Pilgrim Fathers had brought to America from England. He said that he believed that the spirit of the pilgrimage rests with the society. This chapter examines the founding of the Pilgrim Society and development of its early aims and activities, which were formulated amidst those bright lights of the elite London and New York. It does so across 5 sections. The first section traces the origins of the society and establishes precisely who was responsible for its foundation. It also considers why people were motivated to become involved in society in the first place. The second section examines how the society's membership was constituted and what process was it were involved in joining. The third section places the society in the context of the elite associational cultures of London and New York. It does so reference to a variety of other clubs, including some with similar aims to those of the Pilgrims. The fourth section looks in greater detail at some internal debates had by the society in relation to how best to achieve its aims. Meanwhile, the final section examines the ways in which the Pilgrims engendered links with diplomatic officials and why this meant that the society was more successful more quickly than many of its contemporaries. Take care, Amelia. The Commonwealth probably wouldn't have to deal with that in the same way in 1981 as you had to deal with it in America. Especially if you had gone the full Commonwealth route, because it would be local governments. And the national governments of those areas would be representative of the local people, probably. Unless you allow the South Africa sort of style scenario to develop. That's a good one. If the Ram got 6 or 1930s town class light cruisers, would it make sense once that no one wants they should be Edinburgh subclass? And how much damage could the Polish do with 2 town class? 2 town class, the Polish could do a fair amount of damage, but they couldn't really take on battleships. With that torpedo, they could go running around the Mediterranean though and do quite useful. And no, if they're going to get them in the 1930s, they probably wouldn't be Edinburgh subclass. They would probably be... Ooh. Probably batch 2s. So... You're probably talking about Gloucesters. They could theoretically get Southamptons, but probably Gloucesters. Probably Gloucesters. But they'd have to be built in the UK. Going on, but I thought the Mayflower voyage was a way to get rid of our remaining religious fanatics that wanted to suppress the Catholics even more than they were. So invoking the Pilgrim Fathers sees odds. You're talking about history versus politics, my dear friend Colin. What matters is image in politics. What matters is truth and reality in history. And even that truth can vary depending upon perspective, to a lesser or greater extent. The actual facts will tend to not vary, but the interpretation of those facts, and i.e. the truth you're seeking, will sometimes vary upon perspective. How did the Germans get Dreadnought what Dreadnought armoured cruiser meant so wrong? Because Jackie Fisher went out of his way to make sure they did. Or from Chicago. I'm jealous. I'd like to spend my weekends on Heritage Railways on holiday on narrowboat. Those are good times. Holiday on narrowboats is fun. I haven't done one of those since I've been doing a YouTube channel. But, yeah. Might have to do one at some point. C. Clarke, Geostrategic question 1. If the Norway in 1940 Norway invites the Allies in, and Germany is unable to counter-invade, it wouldn't even need Norway to invite the Allies in. They just need to actually go to a full alert and defend their own fortifications, and the Germans probably couldn't get in. Is the Greek Marine Surface Fleet mostly confined to the Baltic Pond for the rest of the war? Well, they still have the Kiel Canal, so they can get out in the North Sea through the Kiel Canal. But they would then have a lot more problems. So they're not probably getting much further than the North Sea. Especially when you consider you can start Overwatch flights from the UK to Norway and back again with aircraft landing, refueling, and coming back. And maybe rearming as well. So it makes life very difficult for submarines and very difficult for surface ships. This is a good book. It's not too expensive either. And as said, link to society is down below. I am not a member. Before anyone starts asking if I am not a member. I have considered it in the past, but I haven't joined. But it's really funny, the Pilgrims were intolerant, very intolerant of other religion, to such an extent that the easygoing tolerant Dutch kicked them out because they were causing trouble. That was pious enough on them. Yeah. Again, politics, history. From Chicago, Polish towns would be weird, less freeboard, more boom. Potentially. So anyway, what is the worst would someone actually build a warship out of? Greenwood. And it doesn't matter which it doesn't matter which wood you do, but if it's unseasoned green wood that you use when you're building a ship, it will rot in seconds. It literally won't be around for a long time. But from Chicago, that interpretation of Pilgrims is actually relatively recent. For the last 30, 40 years. Prior to that, Pilgrims were regarded as highly democratic. Yes. The image of the Pilgrim held up far longer than the reality. Held up for a long time. And even then, it's still something which comes around. Cameron. Heavy bombers based on transiting through Norway would play even more havoc on German shipbuilding than they did based in the UK. True, plus you have to remember fighters forward based in Norway would have a big impact on German aircraft operations. And furthermore, you wouldn't have the air attacks of German aircraft from Norway on the north of the UK. Then you have the scenario that, well, Sweden can sell its ore to, pardon me, could sell its ore to the Allies, and the Allies would be doing their best to buy everything they could from Sweden and from Norway. So none of the very useful oils and lubricants which come from Norway to Germany would be available. And you might well stop the ore flow from Sweden to Germany. Then you've got the case that Finland, by this point, would therefore have a backdoor with support coming from outside, which didn't mean it didn't need to rely on Germany for support. So it might well not have to get involved in the war against Russia. You have the reality that the Germans can't use Norway, Sweden, Finland, therefore, to resupply their operations in the Soviet Union, which would have an effect on their own plans for that. Yeah, it would have a big impact. Honestly, the ships of the line built for the US Navy around the time of the War of 1812 are an excellent example of great ambition, very little understanding of what it actually reality is, and actually investing in proper infrastructure would have saved them a lot of money and a lot of time and actually give them some, and help them with the ships, but they didn't. They were trying to get everything yesterday and on a never never budget. Hey everyone. Steve Clarke, geostrategic question here. How much would it have cost in Reichsmark US dollars for Germany to have any chance of success in the Battle of the Atlantic? Oh, good lord. You see, the thing is, the problem for Germany isn't the fact that how much money it spends on the Battle of the Atlantic. And it could spend its entire defence budget on the Navy. But if it does spend its entire defence budget on the Navy, it ain't going to be able to launch the War of Blitzkrieg or anything like that. If they built... Let's put it this way. You'd have to delay the start of the war for them to build more equipment. And the trouble is, the longer you delay the start of World War II, the more chances, the longer the larger the amount of equipment the British will build. Okay? So, your problem, if you're Germany, is not so much how much money you need to spend, but you need to find a way of spending that money and buying the required 300 submarines, etc., without the British knowing you're doing it. And there is no real way you can do this. Because there are limited facilities in Germany which can produce such ships. Yes, you could try and make them secret. Yes, you could try and hide it. But it would not take long for any intelligence system worth its paycheck to find that out. And one of the problems for the Germans is that whilst it took a while and the help of the Poles for the British to crack German codes, the British always had a fairly impressive intelligence network in Germany, even prior to World War I. They always seem to have had a fairly, not necessarily total, but a fairly deep understanding of what's going on in Germany, i.e. a lot of sources, a lot of little birds tweeting away. Now, this hasn't meant that things are completely beyond the ability of Germany to surprise Britain. Sadly, no. It has occasionally lulled Britain into a full sense of security. But it has led to differences in terms of outcomes for that Germany intended versus what Germany achieved. And in the scenario we're talking about, for them to try and achieve anything, and I mean anything, in terms of a Battle Atlantic conflict, they would need to somehow work out how to massively, and I mean massively, totally, outnumber the British when it came to operational strength. And they're just not going to be able to achieve that. You need not only the submarines, you need... Because let's say you build the submarines, that's great. That's a one-dimensional threat. The British will still respond. And the British get caught out, fine. They're not going to enjoy it, but it won't cause them to drop out the war immediately, and it might give them time to... They'll just focus everything onto the anti-submarine warfare convoys. But to build So you need to build surface ships as well, which could do it, which means you need to build those 9 11-inch gun, basically Scharnhorst-style Deutschlands instead, and you need a lot of those built. And then the British will see that coming, and they'll probably respond with some kind of super cruiser or heavy cruiser scenario, which will either have 12 9.2-inch guns or 6 14-inch guns, depending on who's designing it. Which, actually, if they go to 6 14-inch guns, they might well push for the 12 14-inch guns on the King George V. If that's where the British are going to end up with their super cruiser they're building, they'll want to push for the battleship to be upgraded. So they might well push the tonnage limit. Actually, I had a discussion earlier today on a chat, on the comments on the YouTube channel, over how much a 16 14-inch gun King George V would displace. And my reckoning is between 45 and 47,000 tons. And a few of us have come in at slightly lower, but that's where I'm sort of heading, is 45 to 47,000 tons, because I'm presuming to get the same speed, etc., they're going to need to up the power ratio of the engines. But that's all a sort of interesting scenario, because if you can get a 12 or 16 gun King George V out of it as well, then that's going to change things, because you then sort of going, well, then if the Germans do decide to build the Bismarck, and Bismarck's their 15-inch guns, yeah, we've got 8 15-inch guns. That thing has 12 14-inch guns. Hang on, 15-inch advantage of a 15-inch over a 14-inch. Okay, so for a 14-inch to a 16-inch conversion, we usually go, if you have 3 14-inch, 2 16-inch will fire at a similar rate of fire. Alright, that's normally what we do. We sort of drop it down one. Similar, broadly speaking, similar. Yeah, 8 15-inch do not equal 12 14-inch. Paul from Chicago. There are good arguments for Pilgrim democracy. The pure democracy towns of Yankee New England and congregations churches, democratic without strong reserve rights, arguably. 99 predictions. Ikra missile question. From what I've been able to gather, the RAN and RN magazines seem to differ. Can you briefly explain how? And what, if any, issues, either technical or political, for the two navies came out about a result of that? I can do, but not now, because my dad has a lot of notes on the Ikra, because he was involved in its installation in both navies. So I will go and check those and check what I'm allowed to talk about. And if I'm allowed to talk about it, I will put up his drawings. Fast, cheap, good. Pick 2. Mr. How annoyed, how upon a single axis, how upon a heliacal, no, I'm not going to do that. How screwed is France if Germany moderates their demands and gets their pre-World War alliance? France then is in a lot of trouble. Because the British order of threat priority is German High Sea Fleet, Russia. And if the German High Sea Fleet is in any way cut back, not invested in, not the same size, and Britain is told, yeah, we're not going to race you, we just needed enough to be able to beat up the Russians and the French, then Britain probably goes, well, we've only got an entente with the French. However, we think we might be fighting a war versus the Russians. And you might well see, as I said, I think I've discussed this in a video, a grand alliance come about of Britain, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy and Japan. Because that alliance actually would make sense, because Italy would go, yes, Austria's annoying, but I'm allied with Britain and Germany, and that's useful for us, so we stay. Austria would go, hello, Britain and Germany, yeah, that helps us, and Japan would go, woo, Britain and Germany. You would actually see it would be one time both the army and the navy agree with each other. They would both love that alliance. Hello, Yickers. The thing is, with that alliance, think about it. Russia is in trouble. Because if you have Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, Britain, and Japan, Russia is A, surrounded. B, that alliance would have quite good links with the Ottoman Empire, so if Russia attacked the Ottoman Empire, they'd probably come to its aid. And C, France would have to really think about it before taking on that kind of alliance, that kind of formation. Because that's not going to be an alliance they can pick apart easily. Seapower. And it's ready as well. Geostrategic question 3. Why would a German high command so confident in its code machines and Enigma and lenses were unbreakable? Ego. Literally, ego. And the view that it was perfect. It must be perfect, you know, it was perfect. It was a perfect feat of engineering. That was their view, and therefore it can't be broken. And also there's the fact that you have to remember the British had taken over the entire German intelligence apparatus in the UK. And were telling the Germans they hadn't managed to break it. That does tend to work quite well. So the Germans therefore didn't believe it was broken, and the British were also quite careful in that they only used it when it was absolutely essential to use it. Otherwise, they like to try and let things play out or have other reasons for them being catched. Anyways, giant sequoia is very brittle wood, not very good structurally. Doesn't surprise me hearing that. Andrew Cox, could the Germans use the Russians the way they did for tanks? Not to build submarines. There just wasn't the industry in Russia. And they didn't even really use them for tanks. Colin Cameron, for an idea as to how informed people in Germany and the UK were about each other, just look at the episode of Blackadder Goes Forth that talks about George's uncle. He was also a German, yes, if I remember correctly. Paul from Chicago, but if Germany spends their whole budget on naval structure, the Brits will play the old strategy of, let's you and him fight with Poland, France, and maybe USSR. Yeah. Basically, if they've spent all their money on naval infrastructure, that's great. Then the French, the Poles, etc. will march across the German border and take over Germany. Would the correct topic be suitable for a video? I'll have to check my dad's notes. Wayne's World of Science and Technology. Could you model and test those 12-inch and second 12 and 16 gun King George V's in UAD one day? What I might do is I might do a Twitch stream with it. This is going to sound strange. I'm trying to test out Twitch as the backup for YouTube. And I did a video today, which it hasn't saved, as mentioned, with Empire Total War. But I don't see why I couldn't do one with UAD. Alright, guys, this is where we... Sean, don't be nasty to me. No. No torturing me. Not today. Mr. Roney's End. Keeping a ship on the stocks was a tactic employed by the citizens when they couldn't get money from Congress. USS Puritan B1 is a prime example of working out for them. Scenario with that alliance, Russia is like the nice short blonde woman on the couch surrounded by the nice African American gentleman standing behind her. Huh? I'm not sure what you mean about that one. No. I'd say with that alliance, Russia is a plate of crispy bacon in front of me. Makes one wrong move, we'll get even. My goodness, no torturing me today. So what days can we pencil in for the future for torture? If I do a live on a Monday, that can be the day you can torture me. With difficult questions only. Torture by questions. Oh, I'll upload them to YouTube as well, probably at some point. And then it should. So all Kaiser William needed to do to get everything he wanted was to accept that he needed a junior partner with the Empire, as far as maritime matters went. Yes. Wayne's World. Of course, that sort of alliance would probably lead to a joint Canadian Japanese invasion of Vladivostok. Could do. Puritan is one example of what we need to do, some repairs. Don't worry, Congress, it's not new construction. It's an interesting one, Puritan. Night Heron Productions, you are clearly ignorant of some of the memes floating around about out there. Just remember that ignorance is bliss. I'm happy to be ignorant sometimes. I have heard of Peter Zane, and I have watched some of his videos. And I've seen some of his videos on the Joe Rogan show, because people sent me links. And also it keeps cropping up on YouTube Shorts. Everywhere. Joe Rogan show often crops up on YouTube Shorts. Well, in the nicest way, What you're talking about is a scenario where Britain has 42 more cruisers to call upon. And based on what it actually had to call upon, that's 36 more than it actually had in that pit. Well, hang on, no, that's some New Zealand ones. So 32 more than it actually had in World War II. Yeah, 32 more cruisers would be useful in World War II. Ouch, Stafford. Ouch. Let's look. Jan Glete. Now, also description of being a Pisces. Which may be a clue as to my birth month. Apparently kind and athletic with nice socks. Known to make up songs about muffins. So far I haven't disagreed with anything. And paint flowers on old people. Not usually flowers. Ideal pet, elk. Preferred dog. Lucky smell, onion. Ugh. Lucky noise, clunk. Yep, lucky donut, jam. Happy to that one. Right. Jan Glete. 1500 to 1650. War at sea. Maritime conflicts and the transformation of Europe. This is one of those books which... it's a sort of seminal read. When you're a naval historian, and you've gone to university since 2000, if you haven't read this book, you've probably managed to be in one of the few universities which isn't basically treating it as you have to. Ouch, Stafford. Now, here's one of its sections. How have historians explained the interconnections between warfare at sea and the transformation of Europe's societies and states at this period? With few exceptions, scholarly historians have avoided the question. The same cannot be said about historians interested in warfare in general and warfare on land in particular. War and development of the modern state has also been an important subject for historical sociologists, and we will return to them in Chapter 4. In this section, we will first concentrate on the historical debate about an interesting but surprisingly elusive phenomenon called the military revolution, and some other attempts among historians to explain the role of war in the transformation process. After that, we will look at some of the few attempts that have been made to evaluate the role of warfare at sea in the transformation of European politics and economy. Since the 1970s, attempts by historians to provide generalized explanations about the connections between the development of armed forces and the transformation of early modern Europe has been centered on the Anglo-Saxon military revolution debate. At least, originally it was centered on the possible interconnections between transformation of the armed forces, states and society in early modern Europe. During the debate, various prime movers behind this transformation have been identified. Michael Roberts, who originally formulated the phrase the military revolution in 1955, argued that it was changes in military tactics which transformed state and society. Central to this assertion were the reforms in tactics introduced by Maurice of Nassau in the Dutch army in the 1590s, and developed by Gustav II Adolf in his reforms of the Swedish army up to about 1630. The new type of army, Roberts said nothing about navies, required well-drilled and disciplined soldiers and a large number of professional officers to train the men and lead more articulated formations. As it was, the training and the group of cohesion, which was the strength of the new type of army, it had to become permanent. A better disciplined army might in its turn be used for more ambitious strategies, which in its turn required more soldiers. Larger armies put greater strain on societies, which required more sophisticated administrators. thus creating connection between the changes in tactics and the military organisation and the growth of states. To Roberts, it was the change in society and the state that was important end result. The military revolution was to him a great divide between medieval society and the modern world. The debate about a military revolution was initiated by Geoffrey Parker in the 1970s. He accepted Roberts' idea that the early modern period saw a major rise in the size of armies, but instead of the emphasis on the infantry drill as the key element in the 1590 to 1630 as a decisive period of change, Parker put the emphasis on the development of modern fortifications. Tres Italiani, designed to resist heavy artillery. They changed strategy and army composition, forced army size upwards, and presented the European state with the challenge of how these increased armies could be maintained. This development took a long time to spread to various parts of Europe, and Parker's military revolution is a process extending from the early 16th century to around 1700. Parker also brought the growth of the navies into the picture. Behind both the new types of fortifications and the growing navies, he found the development of artillery. In Parker's explanation, technical change is the prime mover behind the transformation process. He explicitly refrained from presenting any general ideas about the impact of war on society, or on the reciprocal relations between a state and its military system. Instead, his aim was to trace how the European military and naval innovations were initiated, and then follow how they spread over the world as instruments of a European power projection up to about 1800. Roberts and Parker both argued that it was the military innovations which had political effects. In the early 1990s, Jeremy Black, who's a very good lecturer at Exeter University, I think still at Exeter, raised some fundamental questions about the interaction between the political and military factors. I don't agree with everything he writes, by the way, but he's a pretty good lecturer for people studying under Exeter. He saw much of the earlier writings on the military revolution and state formation as typical for a period, say the 1950s to 1970s, when historians and sociologists were mainly interested in the developments of armed forces as instruments for the rulers with absolutionist ambitions. More recent scholarship has put more emphasis on cooperation between rulers and the elite, and this consensus, rather than a coercion of internal enemies, was the base for the growth of the armed forces. Black could not detect any great change in the Roberts century, 1560 to 1660, and suggested that there had been two early modern periods of radical changes which may deserve to be called military revolutions. He singled out the periods 1470 to 1530, firearms and fortifications, and 1660 to 1720, massive increases in the size of permanent armies and navies, flintlock muskets with bayonets replacing matchlock muskets and pikes, line-ahead tactics in navies, as the most dynamic before the great changes during the 1792 to 1815. Fundamental to Black's explanation is that he sees political changes, compromises and cooperation between rulers and social elites as prime movers behind major transformation in the military sphere. It's a very useful book to read. Got to go. Time for experiments from Xmas science books. Good luck. The brake line was only 5 years old. Ooh, sorry to hear that sound. Hi, Jack Ray. How you doing? Hello, Yickers. I think I said hello to Yickers. Hi, Dan. See, Clarke, Alex, so does your answer make von Bulow the worst German idiot who was not a Nazi? There are so many options. If the RZN got a heavy cruise, it's going to be a cannon class design, is it? Yes. They're not going to buy from anyone else other than British. Not in that period. Glad double hellos are good. No. This is one of those books which... well, I'd call them foundational texts because of all the stuff they include. They don't necessarily move the history forward itself, but they include so many references to other points of history and other things that you learn about the debates as you learn about the history. And that allows you to then go and access the rest of the debate. Oh. I'm just, yeah, leaving that one. I am taking to believe that the von Bülow mentioned was not the Danish minister in the 1920s and 30s. Even the Kindle warfare at sea at $60 to $60. Yeah, and it's still not the most expensive book we're going to be talking about today. He was German First Minister at the start of the 20th century. Yeah. Yeah, that's the other von Bülow. There's a lot around who are given that hell out there. It's a family which kind of like, how do I put this? There are certain surnames which turn up a lot in the British government, in sort of the British government and British history, in leadership roles. Henderson is one of them, and yeah, they turn up a lot. No. Ooh. Nope. And hopefully the French, I will announce now, the French Navy should be, French Interwar Naval Aviation should actually go live. The Long Patrol should actually go live tomorrow. It should actually go live tomorrow, that one. Golden Cameron, Doc, if to end the Anglo-Spanish War in 1808 and help the Spanish invasion, they handed over California to the UK, so the US had no large Pacific coast, would it have been the RN at the Japan? You need to be more... At Japan when? As in the RN for going into Japan and bashing their way in? Probably not. They probably leave that to the French or someone else to upset the Japanese. The British plan was always the same with most countries, was let someone else blunder in there first, upset everyone, then turn up. Does it automatically post timestamps? Sorry, I'm going to put this on have this flicking through for a few seconds, because it looks like I have got an imbecile wandering around the garden trying to lift up a heavy pot and break her back again. Sisters. I'd wondered why the light had come on. The big light came on and the whole garden, and then I see this person going past carrying this big pot. Right then, idiot, what are you doing now? So, alright. She's in. My sister has some bright ideas. She's planning on reorganising our entire garden and moving everything around. And to do that, before she does that, she wants to put all the roses, because they're the most difficult to move, in flower pots so we can move them around and see what they look like in various positions. Makes sense so far. What doesn't make sense is, well, you know, I had a spare 5 minutes, so instead of watching television, I decided I'd do it at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night. Go away. Stop being a... Hey, sisters. Sorry. Rant over. So there are a lot of British designed cruisers in the Pacific at the start of World War II. They actually have more to worry about, don't they? Well, it depends where they are. Because they could also, a lot of those cruisers could have found themselves transferred to the Mediterranean. Now, they could well come back. They probably would come back, but yes, the Japanese would have a lot more to worry about. The odds are 4C has more cruisers with it, and actually has cruisers with it, which is going to affect its air defense profile. Also could lead to a dispersal of the attacks. That's something else. Okay? We don't like to talk about this that often, but it is a factor. If you have one ship, one big ship, which looks obviously like a battleship, then the enemy tend to attack that. But if you have, let's say, a load of travel destroyers, which gun, structure, single funnel, look kind of like a sort of battleship from a certain this, you might mistake it's for one, or a cruiser at least. And you have cruisers which look like some of the outlines as similar outlines as some of the capital ships. And then you have some capital ships there as well. It's going to diverse your attack, because some of the pilots are going to make mistakes in the heat of the moment with the adrenaline pumping, with shells going off all around them. They're going to make mistakes. And this is going to disperse the attacks. Yes, they might sink other ships. But yes, it might make them less likely to sink the capital ships. Right. Richard Harding's Sea Power and Naval Warfare, 1650 to 1830. Glyn, if you are worried about the warfare at sea being $60, I comfortably predict this is usually more. And this is not the most expensive book we're going to be talking about today. Shomran, would the Japanese have followed a southern strategy without the US leading a sanctions regime on Japan? And would UK have been as forceful as on Japan while dealing with Germany? Okay. Britain would have probably taken a slightly different route, but still quite forceful route with Japan, and were doing so. They certainly probably wouldn't have gone quite as far as the Americans went, because they would balance their own interests, because of course they're already fighting one war, so they preferred not fight another war. Not least until they've properly trained up and properly reorganised the forces in the Far East, which are mostly not the forces which were in the Far East before the war began, because they've mostly been brought to other areas because they're quite trained to work in hot areas. But leaving that to one side, I think Japan would have followed a southern strategy because they've just found their northern strategy hasn't worked. But it's a case of this strategy, their focus on the war is decided not in 1941, but it's been decided (1940-ish). So the key thing you have to do is think about the 2 years prior to that. And for Japan, in some respects, going toward a southern strategy, well, a southern strategy comes about because France is coerced into giving them their territory without a fight. So therefore that opens up the south and opens up movement. And so the southern strategy comes about, and it's useful. But certainly, if you have a mercantilist view of economics, and you don't have access to the resources you need, you're going to go take them. That's what you're going to do. Okay. Now, Trade 125. What if, during World War II, Spain declared war on the Allies and also decided to invade Portugal and attack Gibraltar with the German army? What would be the consequence? Attack on Gibraltar would probably fail. Basically, mainly because of the sheer amount of defences and personnel in Gibraltar. That's not a good place to try and attack. It's a very narrow front you can advance over, where a lot of firepower can be brought to bear. It would absolutely devastate Gibraltar, but it would also demonstrate the area around it. Invading Portugal, not exactly a bright idea either, because the Portuguese, due to Spain being a fascist regime, do not exactly have unfortified borders. And the Portuguese are kind of passionate about their independence. It also depends on how early it happens. If it happens after America's entered the war, then you might well find Spain becomes the southern front rather than invading North Africa or invading Italy. In fact, invading Spain rather than invading Italy is quite a possible scenario, because Spain is by no means a united nation in that period. So if Spain did not listen to the advice which they were given by Canaris, and actually did join the war and did do all this, I cannot see Franco's regime surviving. So, Seapower and Naval Warfare, 1650 to 1830, Richard Harding. Now, let's see the battle fleet and the idea of sea power. Chapter 3. In his political testimony, intended for the advice of the young Louis XIV, Richelieu summed up his view on the crown's relationship to the sea. Dominion of this element has never been assured to anyone. In a word, the old titles to this realm are force and not reason. In this respect, there is a firm continuity of understanding about the reality of sea power that runs from the 17th century to the present day. Mahan's argument for an overwhelmingly powerful battle fleet was an expression of this reality. However, there is a temptation to extend this idea of continuity to believe that because 17th and 18th century statesmen recognized the fragility of sea power, they also shared with their late 19th century successors a view of what dominion and force meant. In the late 19th century, sea power was synonymous with formal state navies, naval power. In the early modern world, the meaning of sea power was less clearly defined. Only towards the middle of the 18th century does the idea of a naval strategy, which encompassed an idea of long-term domination and force, become explicitly expressed as part of state policy. Thank you, Jack Ray. Gifting 5 memberships. Thank you. This was in Britain and later in the United States, where foreign policy had to be explained to suspicious legislators. Elsewhere, contemporary ideas of sea power and naval force had to be inferred from policy decisions. Yet ships and navies had a role to play in domestic politics as well as foreign affairs, and so the decision to maintain a navy could owe as much to conditions inside a country as any desire to exercise naval force. The most visible expression of sea power was the battleship. From the emergence of this distinctly strongly built and heavily armed type of warship during the first half of the 17th century, naval power was measured by the number of these vessels its state possessed. Typically, at the height of their power in the 18th and early 19th centuries, these three-masted, square-rigged vessels carried between 60 and 120 cannon in broadside batteries. From the 1650s, the English, Dutch, Swedes, Danes and French were well aware that squadrons of these ships were the greatest diplomatic impact. However, few statesmen based their views of sea power exclusively on the battleship. In 1663, Louis XIV spent 50% of his naval budget upon his galley fleet. Spain, which possessed the largest maritime empire of the day, invested very little in battleships until 1718. Galleys, which were supposed to have been eclipsed by the sailing warship in the early 17th century, were an important component of the fleets of Sweden and Russia during the 18th century. In the 1790s, the newly independent United States of America based its naval defense not on the line of battle, but upon a small force of powerful frigates and over 200 diminutive gunboats. To historians of the early 20th century, these were simply mistakes made by monarchs and statesmen who had no grasp of maritime power. The dominance of the world's oceans by the British Royal Navy, which first outbuilt and then outfought its enemies with battleships. Don't agree with everything he writes, but it is worth reading. Proved that sea power was measured by the battleship. The reality, as usual, is rather more complicated than this. I agree to that. That the 17th and 18th centuries, the role of sea power and the advantages of battleships were less obvious. The dominance of the battleship was based on its ability to appear in almost all the waters of the world in sufficient numbers for a long enough period to overwhelm local naval resistance. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, British battleships dominated most oceanic sea routes by concentrating on the terminal points of these routes. They prohibited equal concentrations of potentially hostile men of war and allowed a variety of smaller vessels to exploit the advantages of sea communication. The British Isles and colonies were protected from attack. Frigates could destroy enemy merchantmen or privateers, support landings, attack pirates, and protect friendly traders. They denied the advantages of sea to their enemies while reaping maximum advantages for themselves. This was the classic exercise of sea power, sea control, and sea denial. However, progress towards this end was neither uniform nor fast. It took about 250 years to achieve and involved the most highly developed maritime and financial infrastructure the world had ever known. In times of peace, the cost of maintaining a naval force was so high that it was politically difficult to sustain. In the 1760s, after the most dramatic naval triumphs Britain had ever witnessed, there was not the political will to maintain a navy that would keep its enemies in awe. The overwhelming power of the British battle fleet was the product of decades of investment, and of peculiar set of political, diplomatic, and economic circumstances. Although many states invested in battle fleets from 1650, the willingness to invest in the attendant infrastructure was less evident. The advantages of oceanic sea power were based upon a flexible battle fleet were probably not clear to other powers until the 1760s. The construction and maintenance of a navy had to be placed into the context of other pressing military concerns, and a realistic appraisal of the basic maritime resources of a state. To challenge British oceanic sea power demanded major sacrifices which other powers did not see as necessary or worthwhile. This is not the easiest book in the world to read, but it is a useful book to read. So, Peninsula War version 2. Yes, Colin Cameron. I said the British would build those ships for the Dominions quite happily. That's what they'd do. And they'd build them, but they could only build them if the treaty allowance allowed them to do so. Otherwise, they'd be happy to. Look at the Amphion class, which they gave to the which they sold to the Australians. They're happy to build ships for the Dominions. That's helpful for the Royal Navy. It would also help by providing even more investment in British yards in the 1930s to grow their capacity. Bertrand Franco, the smartest and best advised dictator of the 20th century. Certainly the only one who seems to ever listen to advice. Ruhan, what's the brief reason why Portugal and UK have been allied for as long as they have? Basically marriage. And again, it's interest. We don't have as many rivalries as you'd think. Our biggest rivalry for both of us is Spain, for quite a lot of the period, which makes us quite friendly with each other. And it serves both interests if we work together. And yes, you can resubmit suggestions for Patreon. And please note, Patreon is live. The suggestions post is up. Seems like I have argued before that one of the worst effects of the Washington Naval Treaty is lack of investment in shipbuilding. You will have that seconded and thirded by myself. Without the naval treaties, when do you think the pre-dreadnought form factor would go away? In cruisers, some specialty ships, it would go away quite quickly. In the nicest way, the pre-dreadnought form factor is in many ways a product of the triple expansion engine and trying to get the best out of that. And once you go on to directed fire, you want centerline guns, and once you have add on turbines as well, it becomes a lot easier to build the sort of form factor we see in the 1920s and 30s. Glenn Stewart, my suggestion mail may not be an attempt to get you to do research from me. Yeah, I've seen your suggestion, Glenn. It'd be fun. It would certainly be fun. Space battleships, yes. Night Heron Productions. What would have had to change to see the Iran sticking with Iran design ships rather than US design ships from the 1960s going forward? Well, basically, well, the Australians do operate the River class, which are Leander class frigates, basically of design of the Royal Navy. And when sort of the things like the Far East Strategic Reserve and various other things go away, it becomes more sensible for the Australians to start working alongside the Americans, and that's what they then focus in on. Basically, the Australians buy ships depending on who they think they're going to be fighting alongside. So they buy ships to work with their likely military partner, which they have always done, and it's been sensible to. Form factor, basically its overall design shape. So if we consider the pre-dreadnought era, you have the many levels of guns. You tend to have sort of guns poking out all sorts of different holes, and then you sort of go into the dreadnought era, and slowly the gun decks sort of move to turrets, and everything moves up to turrets. And as guns get bigger, as guns get more powerful, it makes sense to move them into turrets and give them wider fields of fire because you can carry less, but so you want to get more out of the guns you carry. And basically all these things have a factor. I would think the British Empire having more cruisers in the Pacific is going to force them to use their cruisers in Congo to counter them. Probably, but it also depends on how the cruisers are used themselves. That's a reality. How the cruisers are used is going to affect on how the Japanese respond to them. These sound like a really good series of books to get, although I'm a little around my price range from me. Thank you for sharing them. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing them, but it's also the case of the third one is probably going to be the most expensive one. I think it is the most expensive from memory. Thank you, Jeremy Wrangles. Right then. So, the third one is the one which is the topic which comes up most often on this channel in terms of discussions, especially recently. And I would add, you can buy two books. You can buy Massey's Carter Dreadnought and Massey's Castles of Steel. Those are very good books and very good starting books for understanding the naval race. However, they are not possibly the best book. Not possibly the best book. Because the best book is, well, I haven't actually got a proper version of the best book. Because the version I've got was given to my sister's old professor for him to, an engineering professor, for him to review it for a journal. And he did. And then he went, I know who would like this, Alex. So he gave it to me. And this was actually the first ever book I read, which had been written by Matthew Seligmann, who then, a few years later, was one of my examiners during my PhD. Viva. So he was one of the examiners. So we've got Matthew Seligmann, Frank Nagler, and Michael Epkenhans. And it's a Naval to the Abyss, the Anglo-German Naval Race, 1895 to 1914. It's a Navy Record Society publication by Routledge. If you do not want to have a panic attack, do not look up how much it costs. From memory. Last time I looked up, it was a case of, ouch! It's so expensive, it's actually making me to go higher pitched. Owie! Anyway, it has chapters written by, well, all three of them, basically. But you have these chapters in it. Turpin's Ascendancy, the design and initial execution of naval challenges, 1895 to 1945. Recognizing the German challenge, the Royal Navy, 1898 to 1904. Obstacles, Success and Risk, the German Navy, 1905 to 1907. Meeting the German challenge, the Royal Navy, 1905 to 1907. Tirpitz Triumphant, German Naval Policy, 1908 to 1911. Surpassing the German challenge, the Royal Navy, 1908 to 1911. Decay, German Naval Policy, 1912 to 1914. Defeating the German challenge, the Royal Navy, 1912 to 1914. This is, let's see. This book is not only big, it has a CD in it, appendices big. Right? Yeah, that's an actual CD drive. It's an actual, well, not CD drive, CD in there, which is in there to provide you the appendices, because it's that the appendices are that big, they didn't want to print them. And that's in a book which is already 508 pages long. No, I did not say anything like that in my viva. I was very polite to him. He was very, very nice. Measure it, paperback, 75 Canadian dollars. Not terrible, really. Oh. Oh, well, it's gone down a lot cheaper than it used to be then. When this first came out, it was really, really expensive. So it's gone down a lot cheaper. Yeah, I would agree on the hardcover is still $200 plus. Yeah. That for a while was the only copy you were able to get, the hardcover. So, and also, that is why I have a CD drive on my computer. When I built one myself, that's why it has a CD DVD drive. So, Tirpitz was officially appointed State Secretary in charge of the Imperial Navy Office on the 15th of June 1897. A new era was about to begin. One sufficiently distinct from the earlier periods for later historians to refer to it as Ara Tirpitz. If not for the impact of his policies, the sheer duration of his term in office, 1897 to 1916, provided ample justification for this labelling. However, the State Secretary's naval policy did not achieve what it was meant to. Tirpitz himself later despondently acknowledged that the work of his lifetime would come to a close under a negative prefix. This was not least due to the measures his British opponent had rather unexpectedly taken from around 1945 onwards, which were to falsify Tirpitz's basic assumptions. Though the roots of the State Secretary's ultimate failure can accordingly be rooted back to the pillars central to in his very own plan. These fallacies did not emerge until the last years of his first decades in office. Most of the documents in this chapter are selected so as to present a more or less detailed view of Tirpitz's programme as it unfolded amongst almost unimpeded during the first 7 to 8 years of his term in office. This plan basically centered on an armaments program designed to secure Germany's rise to world power status in face of anticipated British interference. At the same time, it aimed at emancipating the fiscal foundation of the Imperial Navy from budgetary control of the Reichstag. Seen in a broader context, both objectives were aimed at the ulterior objective of shielding Prusso-German constitutionalism, which favoured the rule of the pre-industrial elites, from the political effects of the industrialization by relying on this very same industrialization in Germany's quest for world power status. A rather complex armaments program, the Tirpitz plan had to take into account and integrate political, economic, fiscal, strategic, tactical, and technical matters, and consider their interdependency. International politics and strategic or operational naval concepts to be applied against a designated opponent suggested the creation of a specific naval capability which could only be created by observing given tactical and technical needs and potential. Likewise, the required naval capability had to be provided for under the twofold constraints of the industrial capacity available and the willingness of Parliament to appropriate the funds requested. Thus, in turn, called for parliamentary tactics and affected domestic policies, the more so since there was a desire to establish a navy on a stable financial base removed from parliamentary interference. Now, exactly as this book says, and this introduction points out, there are these sections which are written at the beginning of these books, and then it goes to what you can only argue are primary documents. So, like I've discussed in the past, there have been some books which are basically primary material. This book is one of them. It has High Command of the Navy, report to the Emperor concerning the future developments of the Navy from Tirpitz's own papers, 28th of November 1895. Copy, High Command of the Navy, most secret. To your Imperial and Royal Majesty, I dare in recognition of the duties entrusted in me to my position and by Supreme Orders of 17th of May 1892 and 12th of March 1894, and in recognition of the seriousness of the situation in Your Majesty's Navy, to most humbly present the following from asking Your Majesty for your most gracious decency, if in the attempt to express my opinion clearly I state many known facts. Basically, I'm going to tell you stuff which of course, you already know. In the margin, ratio of strength for the German fleet compared to Northern fleets of our probable opponents. For some time now, but particularly since the early 1890s, not only our probable opponents, but all the states that have understood the importance of fleets for a nation's status in the world as a world power and for its commercial interests, have made great efforts to develop and expand their fleets, in particular their battle fleets proper. In contrast, the means provided for the maintenance and development of Your Majesty's fleet have not been able to prevent both the relative and absolute strength of the fleet from declining significantly, since the absolute strength of the fleet since the mid-1880s. After the construction of armoured ships and cruisers had been put on hold for an extended period of time during the 1880s, the construction of the 4 Brandenburg-class vessels and the construction of the ships of the Siegfried class, which are intended to use in coast defence and are thus limited use in pitched battles, has not been able to stop this decline. The ratio has already shifted in such a way that due to conversion of the 2 ships of the Sanchen class and the comparatively small expansion of naval forces in East Asian waters, there are great limits to which our fleets in home waters can do. Therefore, the Secretary of State of the Imperial Naval Office and I have agreed to have the necessary conversions of the old single-screw ironclads carried out as quickly as possible during the current phase of mobilization. But even after completion of these authorizations, which by their nature can only increase the old vessel's combat effectiveness to a limited degree, no noteworthy improvement in this unfavorable ratio of strength can be expected. This is due to the fact that the overall condition of our fleet's material has deteriorated too much since the mid-1880s. The 4 Brandenburg-class armoured ships have only replaced 2 ships, of which had already been lost or decommissioned, Grosse Kurfürst and Hansa, and 2 completely obsolete ships, Friedrich Karl and Kronprinz. Since only one single replacement for our other outdated ironclads has been approved, the fleet is undergoing an extremely threatening decline compared to the other fleets of other states. The following brief summary of France's Northern Fleet and Russia's Baltic Fleet are probable opponents, and the entire German fleet in the spring 1896 and in spring 1901 offers an impression of the size of the danger. The year 1901 has been chosen since that is the date by which the conversion of the ships of the Sanchin class will have been carried out, and all the approved new ships of the German fleet will have been completed. A later year, when Germany's situations will evidently be considerably worse, would not have been chosen for this comparison, since Russia and France have long-term and firm shipbuilding schemes, but Germany does not. Ratio of strength in spring 1896. French Northern Fleet, modern ocean-going battleships 8, older ocean-going battleships 8, smaller coastal defence ships 2, armoured cruisers 2, protected cruisers 9. Russian Baltic Fleet, modern ocean-going battleships 5, older ocean-going battleships 1, smaller coast defence battleships 8, armoured cruisers 9, protected cruisers 2. Entire German fleet, modern ocean-going battleships 4, older ocean-going battleships 10, smaller coast defence battleships 8, armoured cruisers none, protected cruisers 4. List the likely ratio of strength in spring 1901. French Northern Fleet, 9 to 10 modern ocean-going battleships, 10 older ocean-going battleships, no smaller coast defence battleships, 4 armoured cruisers and 18 protected cruisers. Russian Baltic Fleet, 10 modern ocean-going battleships, 1 older ocean-going battleship, 7 smaller coast defence battleships, 12 armoured cruisers and 8 protected cruisers. Entire German fleet, 5 modern ocean-going battleships, 10 older ocean-going battleships, 8 smaller coast defence battleships, 1 armoured cruisers, 7 protected cruisers. I mean, doesn't that just make your heart cry? Seriously, consider the state of the German Navy. The turmoil, the upset, the terror. So, basically, if you want to, like I've done with other books in the past, the documentary books, this is a documentary book. It's got all the documents in. You can go and read them. You can basically consider it access to primary sources if you can't get to those archives. So it's very, very good. We'll see who wins, Wayne. We'll see who wins. This is Clarke. Regarding the 2 videos on Steam equipment this week, I have a comment. Steam technology is difficult to follow because Steam usage has declined recent times. It's also, I would say, the thing is, I was trying to be careful in not repeating other videos I've done, and also I had to still give context of things like turbines, etc., but I didn't want to jump into information which is going to be in the turbine video too much. Mm-hmm. Oh, I could be very naughty. I'm not going to be, but I could be. Oh. Sorry. I should say, something just flashed up on the corner of my screen which said, Drakenfell is live. And I thought, well, hang on, well, that's taken a long time to flash up. And of course, it has taken a long time to flash up. Because I know he went live at, the same time I did. But, yeah, now I'm looking at his thing from his library. Surrounded by books. Oh, what's he got behind him? Ah, well. Right. Back to my own live stream. Delete. Close that. Hello, everyone. We're back. Basically, this is if you want the details, if you want the information in the raw form so you can read the actual documents, it's an excellent book for that. And it will give you a lot of ideas about things. Ships, warships, British. Oh, Hood even gets a mention in here. I remember that now. Agincourt doesn't. I think. Actually, let me check 481. Oh, there's a full discussion of British warships and their protection. Oh, this is Jellicoe. There is a memorandum from Jellicoe to Churchill, with marginal comments by Churchill in here from TNA ADN 116-309/3091. 14th July 1914. I offer the following comments on the minutes for the relative strength of the line of battle of British and German dreadnoughts in 1917. I should like first to point out that it is somewhat misleading to take battleship strength alone and to omit the battle cruisers, since in 1917 Germany possessed 8 battle cruisers and this country only 9, including New Zealand. In order to give proper superiority under fast armor ships, the 4 Queen Elizabeths should, I think, be classed as fast battle cruisers, bringing the respective totals. Winston Churchill, there are why 4? There are 5. Classed as fast battle cruisers, bringing the respective totals of these fast ships to Germany 8, Great Britain 13. It is to be observed in the passing that the displacement of Queen Elizabeth and the later German battle cruisers is practically the same. I have drawn up a fresh table, which I enclose herewith, which includes the battle cruisers. An investigation of this table shows that 1917, if we omit the Lord Nelsons and Agamemnon, which have not a speed sufficient of dreadnought, for the dreadnought line of battle, and the British total of armoured vessels of dreadnought type, and later becomes 45, including the Malaya, the German 28. If we allow for 4 British dreadnoughts going to the Mediterranean, plus the 2 Lord Nelsons, this becomes, in home waters, 41 British, 28 German, i.e. 1 less than 50% superiority in British ships. WSC, we are not considering this. Winston Churchill, we are not considering dispositions. Turning now to a comparison of British and German vessels. For convenience, I have drawn up my table so as to place the British and German vessels of the same programme year opposite one another, and have given further details in order they may be more easily compared. I think it will be conceded that the only really fair method of comparison with these ships is that of displacement. WCSC, no, this is too sweeping. It is prudent to assume that the German designers are not inferior to our own, and therefore if British ships are approximately the same displacement show a marked superiority over the German ships in, say, the weight of metal fired from broadside, it is certainly that they have some corresponding inferiority. A glance at the table shows at once that the main feature of the British ships is a superior weight of metal fired, and that the corresponding disadvantages are much inferior protection on the side. For the gun positions, conning towers, and internally against torpedo explosion, and in some cases inferior speed. We may be right in giving greater prominence to offensive qualities, and I believe we are right, but we may be wrong. And in an important matter of this sort, we ought not, I think, to assume that we are entirely right. The Germans would argue that their guns are of sufficient power to carry their projectiles through our comparatively weak armour, and that as our armour is only placed on the ship's sides in patches, in many cases it has not been necessary to have heavier guns hitherto. I do not agree with them because I attach so much importance to the weight of bursting charge, but others may agree. One of our cleverest gunnery officers, for instance, has argued with some force that 10 13.5-inch guns is a far superior armour to 8 15-inch guns, owing to the better chance of obtaining hits from a greater number of projectiles fired in salvo. Besides, having a considerably thicker armour over the main belt, and for their protection of their guns, the Germans carry thick belt protection to the ends of the ships to a far greater extent than we do, and their armour is carried up much higher on the side than is our ships of the same state of construction. The force of the foregoing remarks is seen at once by a glance at the diagrams of the British and German vessels which I attach. Compare, for instance, the length, height, thickness, sect of the armour of the 1909 battleships Colossus, Kaiser, the 1911 battlecruisers Queen Mary and Seydlitz, and the 1911 battleships Queen George V and Koenig. The inferiority of the protection of the British ships against guns and torpedoes is very striking. WSC. Second Sea Lord. You were a member of the boards of the Admiralty that designed these vessels. This is undoubtedly a weak point in the design of our ships. Further, the Germans have far more complete inner armour protection against torpedoes than we have. It is proper to notice the great spirited German ships in a number of torpedo tubes. Winston Churchill. Cross. It is true that their torpedoes are slightly smaller, but the inferiority in size is very slight. In the table which I attach, it will be noticed that I have included in the weight of projectiles fired from the German ships their 5.9-inch calibre, whilst I have omitted the 6-inch guns in our latest ships. This is insufficient reason for excluding the powerful armament to our disadvantage. I have done this purposely because we do not use our 6-inch guns in the fleet action. Our complement of officers is insufficient to control the fire of these guns, even if we desire to use them. I am one of those who hold the view that it would be unwise to use them. But again, there are some who hold the contrary view, and they may be right and I may be wrong. In any case, the Germans, by using a director for their 6-inch guns, dispose of the greatest objection to their use in their fleet action, viz. The interference to the primary armament due to their smoke. I will now come to a more detailed comparison between British and German ships of corresponding programme years, and will show that the assuming equality of design German ships should have considerable fighting superiority over the British, due to their greater displacements. Winston Churchill. This is certainly not true, and if it were true, would be a scathing condemnation of the British Admiralty during the years before the present board took office. Taking first the battleships, I omit vessels of the 1914 designs, as our information on the German ships of this year appears to be very meagre. Programme year 1913. British ships are of 2,000 tons less than the German. The weight of the broadside with the German 5.9-inch guns included shows a slight inferiority on the part of the British ships. There is no doubt the German ships have better armour protection, and it's probable that they have certainly 1 and probably 2 knots more speed. No, this isn't the case. 1912. In this case, we are dealing with the British Queen Elizabeth class. They have 2,000 tons more displacement than the German ships, and are undoubtedly greatly superior in every respect except that of armor protection. 1911. Displacements are equal. The Germans have more protection and more submerged torpedo tubes. The British show a heavier weight of broadside. Possibly on the greater speed versus the R class, but I don't think they did in 1913 ships. 1910, British are 1,300 tons less displacement. The German ships have much more protection and 2 more torpedo tubes. The British weight of broadside is superior. British 1909, British 2,000 to 4,000 tons less displacement. The Germans have much more protection and 2 more torpedo tubes. The British ships have superior weight of projectiles on broadside. 1908, the British ships 3,000 tons less displacement. The Germans have far more protection. 3 more torpedo tubes. Armament about equal. 1907-1906, displacement about equal. The British have a slight advantage on speed. The Germans in protection and have 3 more torpedo tubes. Winston Churchill. The 4 Nassaus are well known to be failures and thoroughly bad designs. It is well to point out in passing that weight of projectiles fired on the broadside is a misleading method of comparison taken by itself. Striking energy of projectiles at fighting range is a more correct method so far as gunfire is concerned. To take extreme case, no one could argue that a 2,000-pound projectile fired at a velocity of 1,000 feet per second was superior to a 1,200-pound projectile fired with a velocity of 3,000 feet per second. Winston Churchill. This is more than balanced by the weight of bursting charge carried through the armour. It will be seen, therefore, that far from the bursting of British ships showing a superiority, the exact opposite is usually the case, and assuming equality in design, it's highly dangerous to consider that our ships are as a whole are superior and even equal fighting machines. Winston Churchill. How can you detach yourself from decisions over which you had direct responsibility? Why were inferior ships designed? The Admiralty had a free hand. Surely these questions would be particularly put to you. He, after all, Jellicoe had been 3rd Sea Lord. Turning now to the battlecruisers. 1911 ships. The British 2,000 tons more displacement. German ships had better protection. British ships superior weight of projectiles on broadside. 1910 ships. British ships. British 3,000 tons more displacement. Germans much more protection. 2 more torpedo tubes. British considerably greater weight of broadside. 1909 ships. British 4,000 tons more displacement. Germans more protection. 2 more torpedo tubes. British considerably superior weight of broadside. 1908 ships, British 4,000 tons, less displacement. Germans far more protection, 2 more torpedo tubes, weight of broadside about equal. 1987 ships, British 2,000 tons, less displacement. Germans had far more protection, very slightly superior weight of broadside, and 1 more torpedo tube. It will be seen, therefore, by that the earlier battlecruisers of German ships have greatly superior displacement, and exactly the opposite is the case of the latter battlecruisers. The difference shown in table in design and horsepower gives superiority to the British ships. This may be partially owing to the fact that it is well known that the Germans use small tube boilers and force them to a far greater extent than we do for our large type boilers. On the other hand, this should mean that the life of the German boiler tubes will be very much less than half of the British. It's always cool to have this. Everyone, sitting in his library surrounded by books. Is this how historians flex on each other? No, this isn't. This is, honestly, sitting in the library, looking at surrounded by his books. I'm kind of jealous because he's got all his books up on shelves, whereas mine are sitting on my railway level still. But I am slowly organising it all. So yeah. I will get this all organised. It's slowly getting there, and I'm slowly getting more and more shelves up. Something because yes, you remind me. I have Drax video after yours concluded. And I have Drax video after I've concluded. Something. How would Alaska be received if she did a diplomatic visit to Britain in 1914? Alaska. USS Alaska. Do you mean the one from World War II or the earlier one? I think there was an earlier one. There wasn't an earlier one around in World War One. There was the Woodenhold screw sloop, but that was gone by 1883. So yeah, you're talking about the Alaska class cruiser. If that turns up in World War One, that's going to scare the bejesus out of people. You and Draken on the same time is wrong. Why? It's rather fun. Well, the problem with the fuses, Sean Brennan, is of course the British had procured their fuses originally from the Germans and traditionally procured them from them, and then suddenly rushed out to try and develop their own and didn't really develop a good one. And then eventually do come up with a good one after Jutland. Why is so much more weight given to gun broadside rather than torpedo broadside? Torpedoes generally have reasonable boom compared to shells, they let in water. Likelihood of actually hitting target, likely range of engagement, and all sorts of things that sort of factor in. The fact is, you'll fire many shells before you for any torpedo you fire. What is planned for the Centennial Bruships? I think I'm going to do a sci-fi edition. I think. Take care, Glenn. Enjoy. You did buy the naval route to the abyss. Mm-hmm. So, what modern ship could you send to 1914 for a diplomatic visit and scare your dollars? 4-class carrier with full air arm? That would be pretty scary. That would be pretty scary. But if you want to think of something which is in their range of understanding, possibly a Trieste class LHD would actually be more scary for them than a 4-class carrier. There again, a 4-class carrier is nuclear powered, so that would do. But it's got no big gun. Whereas the Trieste has 76mm with the ability to deploy Marines. Ooh. And of course, there is always the Kirov. Or rather, as we call them, the Peter Veliki. A Peter Veliki would be interesting. That would certainly be interesting, the Peter Veliki turning up anyway. Yeah. But as a rule, both me and Drac keep to fairly regular schedules, so it's only rare we sort of overlap each other. What 1914 ship could you time travel to a day to scare us? HMS Warspite or HMS New Zealand. Take your pick of whichever one has plot armor. Sorry, second can of 1901 is now being poured out. Oh, that's almost a religious experience, and I realise it's probably blasphemy to say so. Rhino. Next book, but not last book. Parrot Sea by Lisle et Rose. Now, this is 1919 to 1945. And I will start off by saying there are sections of this book which I wholeheartedly disagree with, but there are sections of the book I really do agree with, and so yeah, it's a book to read and thought-provoking. There is a reason why, as a rule, it is positioned over there, because it's not a book I would normally recommend, but in the context of the other books I've already mentioned today, it makes sense. Nicholas Montserrat's fictional captain George Eastwood Ericsson, a retread commander of the corvette Compass Rose, might marvel at the instinctive heroism and competence of his common sailors. The sea is in their blood, he thought. The phrase meant something after all. It was not just a romantic notion left over from Nelson. It was not just a baritone rendering of the Heart of Oak, with many manly emphasis on "jolly tars are our men." The sea is in their blood meant that you could pour Englishmen, any Englishman, into a ship, and they made that ship work and fight as if they had been doing it all their lives, catching up, overtaking, and leaving behind the professionals of any other nation. It was the basic virtue of living on an island. Such maunderings were pleasing conceits at best, not wholly borne out in experience, and totally unmindful of the enormous cost of the poor souls forced to incorporate the Royal Navy's lower deck, as well as the crew seas into their experience. Anecdotal evidence suggests that where the Royal Navy was most professional, it was also most hidebound and inflexible. Captains and officers coming into the service from civilian life on a merchant marine, even with Royal Navy backgrounds, tended to be more reasonable and humane. Montserrat himself was a hostilities-only officer, and he portrays Ericsson as a retread from the merchant marines. So were real-life captains, E.S.F. Fergan of Jervis Bay and Edward Kennedy of Rawalpindi, both of whom treated their charges humanely and with respect, earning near adoration from their crews as a consequence. But so did officers like Dalrymple Hamilton, Vian. I can go through a list of professionals under this category who do get complete and utter respect from their crews. And that's before we get on to the various commanders of the Royal Canadian Navy in tribals, etc. U-boats' ability to overwhelm single convoys and sink large numbers of ships could not be denied, but at key moments Donnet simply did not possess either the submarines or the aircraft to find and then overwhelm enough British convoys. In theory, you can find and overwhelm a convoy at certain points. Not during Christmas night time 1940, because, at this point, found only one German submarine in the Atlantic, and vital replacements had not yet reached French and Norwegian ports in sufficient numbers. Even if they had, the great smashing winter seas of the North Atlantic wore down the U-boats and their crews and made attacks on convoys, even when found, virtually impossible. At the turn of the year, however, Donitz began dispatching his grey wolves to the convoy lanes, and in January and February 1941, the number of U-boats on patrol in the eastern and central Northern Atlantic gradually crept past 10, and the ocean was moderate enough to permit them to send more than 300,000 tons of British shipping plunging to the bottom. Now, 300,000 tons, that sounds like a tremendous amount. Let's see. 300,000 tons in 1941. Now, let's see. Yeah. Now, 300,000 tons, let's put this in context. In 1940, the first 7 months of war, ending from 1939 to 1940, the British lost 371,000, well, the Allies lost 371,000 tons of ships on the North Atlantic, which was 75 ships. They lost 49,000 tons on the South Atlantic, which were 8 ships. And they lost 319 ships in UK waters, which came into a total of 883,000 tons. But if we go further, and we go to April to December 1940, the British and Allies lose 321 ships in the North Atlantic, which is 1.68 million tons. That's 321 ships. So, in the total of 1941, they lose 2,423,000 tons, or 496 ships. What's the point I'm making? 300,000 tons is not a lot of individual ships. It's a lot of weight, but it's not a lot of individual ships. And the fact is that if we consider in total losses, let's see, that's 1,299 plus 878. By gum, let's be honest, that's about 2,100, and that's 402. So, yeah, they've lost about two and a half. They've lost over 2,500 ships by 1941. By the time you're into 1941 that this one's discussing, millions and millions of tons. 3.4 million tons plus 4.3 million tons plus 3.4 million tons equals 7.7, or actually let's be honest, 7.8 million tons, and yeah, 1.3. So probably 9.2 million tons worth of shipping lost in the first part of the war. 300,000 tons is a lot, but it's not. But it's still a good book to read to give you ideas. I'm not sure I'd call it a good book, but it's a good book to read to give you things to think about. How far back could you take a ship back before he looks at it and accuse you of witchcraft? I doubt you get accused of witchcraft in the 1800s, but if you turn up in the 1700s with a modern warship, they probably would think you were something sent by God or devil. You probably want to take something back which was coal-fired, though, so honestly, if you could take HMS Dreadnought or something like that back, probably a Northern Nelson would be better. Something not turbine-powered, because turbines require a lot more maintenance than a good triple expansion engine does. I do wonder how the British convinced the USA to let the UK build cruisers for Dominions. Basically, it was part of the British allowance. So basically, for the British to build more cruisers for the Dominions, you'd have to increase the British and American allowance. Yes, not join a free trade area. Well, America probably would, actually. They would be invited to join, and then there's a case of if you're invited to join, you then have to turn it down. And you have to actively decide why turning it down is a good idea. Whereas the British probably send it to the Americans and go, look, what we've done is we set up a free trade area of all these nations, and this is how we're going to keep them from going communist. Do you want to join? Under those circumstances, the Americans will probably go, yes, please. After all, the Americans are part of the North American Free Trade Association and always encouraging people to join free trade associations, so I can't see why they wouldn't. I want to see you and Drac do a side-by-side broadcast as who drops first. I tend to get interrupted more often than he does. If I wanted to convince someone the world was not peaceful and harmonious between the end of the Russian Civil War and World War II, any good reading? Anything on the League of Nations or international relations in the 1920s and 30s. Thank you, Wayne. That's very nice of you to do that for Stafford. Goosemaster China. Donitz needed 300 subs on patrol. The best he ever did was 150. 1,500 boats were but built versus patrolling is different stat. And you must remember, a lot of boats were sunk. A lot of submarines were sunk. You know, you start to go through the various books, the various results of lost submarines, and it starts to go up quite dramatically once you get to a certain point. And that's the main problem for the Germans. They started losing boats at a rate greater than they could really replace them. Ouch, that's got very painful by that point. This one, I don't know why, but the Kriegsmarine got much closer to starting Britain in 1917 than in the 1940s. It's principally because of the British government not implementing convoys. And that's literally why they do as well as they do. And also because they're concentrating... there is no... let's put it this way. One of the things you have to remember is the crash build of escorts for World War II starts in 1938, 1939, the programs that will lead to them. The crash build programs for escorts in World War I start in 1916. So that basically tells you why. Quizmaster China, but untrained crews will die quickly. Guess who gets the better gear, best gear and worst gear? Correct. Ace sub-commanders got all the cool new toys. Newbies got... Yeah. Add a Borodino class to the current Russian Black Sea Fleet. Heck, add a dozen. Borodino class. Well, honestly, if you have a Borodino class actually in service, it isn't going to change what's going on in Ukraine much at the moment. And that's why 4 triple 14-inch guns are powerful, and they would certainly make a big case for any movement along the coast. But they'd be those ships would be so old they'd be in a lot of trouble. If you got brand new modern ships, you'd be sitting there going, "Well, why have you built a ship like this now when it can't have the air defense you need?" Especially with deck armor of only between 37.5 and 75 millimeters. Yeah, there are some bombs which take those things out. Quite a lot of them. And look, I still say you could increase your subscription rate if you share a live stream deck. Probably could do, but I don't think we haven't done a joint video in ages. We do. Trouble is, it's going to sound strange. We do the World of Warships Armchair Admirals together. We do Bilgestromps together, and we're going. We went to Canada together. We're hopefully, again, announcements to come later this month. Going away again together this year. There is a certain point at which we like a bit of independence from each other. You know, I don't mind. I do like appearing on his channel and chatting away with him, but you know, we do so much. We chat so often already. We've got to record another episode of Bilgestromps tomorrow. That's the first one of 2023. It gets recorded tomorrow. My good, you did a vid of you playing a space game and said it demonstrated tech tree, how tech decisions matter. Are you planning to play through the game during Year of Tech? There are a few. I'm still testing out various games. Gareth, aka Garius the Brit, aka another member of the Canada crew, is strongly urging me to do Victoria 3. I think it's called the game, and I'm considering it. I'm basically, I'm doing some game test out things on Twitch because they go up, and then that's the plan. I've been thinking about it tonight while live, and I'm going to do some testing games out, UAD and various other things on Twitch because they go up and then they go down. If you catch them, that'd be great. See what people think of them, and I'm going to see which one works for my purposes. Space game was Galactic Civilizations 3. It's a good one. Mark Harkness, wars tend to be started by less competent because the more competent try to achieve their goals without war. The less competent force the more competent to war. George, if I remember correctly, UK did not start using convoys in World War I until midway through the war, whilst in World War II they were moving to start doing convoys pretty quickly after it started. They basically implemented them the moment the war started, yes. And the Quizmaster China, and yes, the USA didn't get any convoys for at least 6 months into the war, resulting in lots of avoidable losses. They didn't have the escorts to escort the convoys, and it took a lot for them to ask the British to basically supply the escort ships. There is a reason Flower-class ships and Flower-class corvettes end up in service with the US Navy. And it's not because the US has a jonesing for a Flower-class, it's because they need them. Dr. Clarke, you've often said the Iron suffered from a cruiser shortage. If money, actually treaties more than money, because money, the government was always happy to provide the money for the cruisers. Yes, the Royal Navy did try and get. There was this absurd thing with the cut price counties, but leaving that to one side, they were always stump up the money for the cruisers. So it wasn't so much money was an object; it was the treaty limit. But if the British wanted at least 70, and honestly would probably preferred 80. So basically take every class of cruisers the Royal Navy builds in the 1920s and 30s and add on 50% onto those numbers. And that's what would have made them happy. You made a throwaway comment in the last comment response video about motor torpedo boats. This has led me to spend most of today trying to prepare an entry-level basics thing for this. Motor torpedo boats. What inspired you? See, Clarke, I recommend Stellaris. I'll look at them. I've got a few games to consider. I don't want to do... It's one of the things of... I want to... when I'm writing especially, I tend to actually turn off my computer games. But I need them as part of this year. So I need to sort of make sure it works and make sure it's point, and also limit my timing. And one of the good advantages of actually doing a live stream of the game is there's a time thing flashing in my corner, so I don't play for too long. And the options I've got which work are Rome Total War, because Railroad Tycoon 3 I cannot get to work on this computer at all, but that does actually have a good tech tree in it. Sid Civilization 6, which... okay. Stronghold. Supreme Commander. I have both that and the Forged Alliance version. Total War Empire. Total War Medieval 2. Total War Rome 2. And Total War Shogun 2. Also have, of course, Galactic Civilization 3, which I think I mentioned. And I was tempted to try Timberborn just to wind you all up by talking about beavers the whole time. Because I thought, well, you know, you could hear me talking about beavers for a long, long time. So many variants, so many acronyms, so many subtly different lengths. And this is just the British. Yes. MTBs are fun. Anuk, did the RN have to destroy any cruiser due to Washington Naval Treaty or London Naval Treaty? Washington Naval Treaty, no, because remember the Washington Naval Treaty only sets the ceiling of 10,000 tons limit on the individual ship. It doesn't limit the total number of ships you can build. London Naval Treaty pretty much is what curtails the build of the counties, and the London Naval Treaty Mark II is what turns the town class into the Crown Colonies. Seneca, what if through some miracle some PT boat sinks Yamato Musashi in a single day? How would the Japanese High Command react, and how would the US Navy react? The US Navy would react by awarding Congressional Medal of Honor to all involved, and presidential unit citation. That motor torpedo boat would probably be put on a gold plinth outside of the White House. As for... the Japanese, they would probably be crying somewhere in a corridor. Genuinely, I haven't liked anything Sid Meier's Civ series since Civilization 2. Based on this, I vote for beavers, purely for the entertainment value of me talking about beavers and engineering. That can be fun. I do have the Homeworld series of games. I do have them as well. If I open up my Steam system, I have Homeworld Remastered Collection. I also have Endless Space. I have Defense Grid and Defense Grid 2, which is actually quite a fun gun. I have Hospital Tycoon. I have the full Shogun Total War collection. And I have pretty much every Stronghold video game ever made, which I'm still not quite sure how I have. And Carrier Command Gaia Condition, Gaia Mission, and also Battlestar Galactica Deadlock, which is another option. And of course UAD. Then Hills, vote Shogun 2. Could see you and Drac recreating an alternate historical naval battle using Warlord's victory at sea, or other naval top the game, possibly with Jamie as the commentator. Potentially. Stronghold was really cheap. No, I actually bought the Stronghold series as it came out because I really liked the first edition, which was a castle builder game. I like building castles. It was fun. And then the next one was okay, so I bought the rest of them when they came out and they weren't that expensive. And it was a case of, oh, yeah, it's kind of gone downhill. I want a dog boat. We all want a dog boat. They were gorgeous, they were cute, and they worked. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to a dog boat, the dog boat, aka the Fairmile D. Forward by Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Lewin. Four 18-inch torpedo tubes. Let's put it as a display. Two quick-firing, power-operated 6-pounders. Two and twin 20mm Orlikon. Plus various machine guns and other things. Yep. This is not a vessel you want to have an argument with. Pound for pound, this thing will take on pretty much anything. Just might not survive it. Frostpunk. Survive an Ice Age with Victorian steam tech. I'll have a look into them. If there are suggestions for games, please do comment below what you think would be good for a tech tree game for me to do. And as said, what I'm going to do is I've been trying to figure out for a while how to gently set up the Twitch channel part of this thing, so there's a backup channel, because one of the things I've noticed with Twitter changing as much as they have, and a lot of people talking about Twitter possibly going, which I never thought it would do, but just in case, I haven't set up a Mastodon thing. I do have a Google blog, but that's another thing which is Google based, along with YouTube. So if any of these things go down, then I have a problem. So hence my theory of, well, let's sort of soft maintain a Twitch channel as a backup option. And yeah, doing some gaming on it seems like the sensible way to keep it up. Frostpunk is a little depressing now. Let me see. Store Frostpunk. How much is it? There's Frostpunk 1 and there's Frostpunk 2. Do I need to have played 1 to work out 2? Oh, that's not out yet. Oh, well, I'll add that to my wish list. And let's go back to the search. Frostpunk. And it's £25 for Frostpunk. Well, I'll consider it. I will consider it. My enter your date of birth. My date of birth is a long time before that. I am sorry, machine, but you are definitely thinking me younger than I am. Apparently it's got mature content in it. Considering the amount of various things I've blown up over the years in various computer games, it's not really going to bother me that much. Actually, no. Full Game of the Year edition is $36.92, so for the full version it's £37. I'll think about it. When the videos, when I've got it worked out so the videos do actually record, and therefore I can post them to YouTube as well, I will do. I might actually set the system to record them automatically on my own computer rather than relying on Twitch. Hang on. Just going to put this back up here for a second, because I think I heard a fluffy research assistant. And which one is it? Is it the foxy one, or is it the... Well, the lights are on, so I think it's the regular ones. No? Oh, that's sad. I went outside as they went in. No. And apparently it's too cold to let one come down here with me. That's sad. I'm AC Naval History on Twitch. It's just the same as my Twitter handle and everything else. It's AC Naval History. I am very, very lazy when it comes to naming things. AC Naval History is what turns up everywhere. When did the Fox get promoted to Fluffy Research Assistant status? Well, that was basically done due to pressure of viewers, because the amount of you who basically were coming up with different names for what the Foxy Research Assistant could be, or the Feral Research Assistant rather than the Fluffy Research Assistant, that I just basically bowed to peer pressure. Showman, I noticed some channels on Twitch are not too dissimilar to Hot Tub Historian. Yeah, and if I get to stay in another place with a hot tub, I will be repeating Hot Tub Historian. And in fact, I give you this promise: if the plans go ahead for whatever we for our plan for this year, and if we do manage to basically use the model of the Canada Naval History trip to expand on things, I will try and make sure one of the places we stay in has a hot tub, so that we can do the Naval History Hot Tub Historians. So all four of us in there. And I know Dan Freeman will be looking forward to that especially. I hope he's still watching. Directory. Oh, Dr. Clarke discovers default values on web pages. Birth date. Yes, but it's so generously young. We might live stream it on YouTube and Twitch. Don't worry, Dan. It'll be fun. I said, why did the US do stuff that seems so detrimental to its objective? Often because they don't realise it's detrimental when they're doing it. And that brings us to today's last video. Well, not last video, last book. Sorry, brain died. Strategy of the Seapower and its development and application by Captain S.W. Roskill. The British half of the duo, who are single-handedly responsible for making it look like, with the titles of their various books, which were designed to sell, the idea that Britain and America might actually go to war with each other in the 1920s and 30s. That was never likely. And even in their books, they admit it's unlikely. But they just say, oh, there was tensions. No, there really wasn't. There was just national interests. But the difference was, here is the different point. The British and the Americans were always talking and usually understood each other enough. The Americans never pushed the British too far, and the British never pushed the Americans too far. And the British won some, the Americans won some. The Americans lost some, the British lost some. And sometimes they both lost, and sometimes they both won. Curious circumstance for international relations, but it can happen. International relations is not a zero-sum game. That is the first thing you have to learn. Now, the reason it's not a zero-sum game is because your nation's version of victory and the things it can get out it wants to win can be different from my nation's version of victory. For example, for the British, the naval treaties, they can be seen as a loss, but they can also be seen as a victory because they eliminate the need to worry about competition from all their other prospective powers. So they can concentrate on building and focusing on technology and paying off debt and rebuilding their nation post-World War I, which is good. They also have another benefit because they're playing a bet. The Americans get the status of being the same size as the British, but the British are banking on the American Congress not funding it. And guess what? It turns out the Brits are right. So that's fine. For the Americans, their version of victory was being seen as being one of the most powerful nations in the world. The equal. They got the recognition. That gave them the status. They were happy with that. That meant it was a win for them. They also didn't have to take part in a naval race, which they would probably have. It would probably have A, been a technology race, and B, would have just meant a lot of political capital in the US would get wasted on arguing over whether or not to build any ships at all, and a race which they might end up losing, and the US Navy admirals actually worried they'd end up losing, because even if it was a tech race, because the US Congress might not give them the money. Yeah, there are always going to be politicians complaining. The thing is, 9681, politicians will always complain about something in order to get airtime. The difference is whether anything comes from it or not. So, a strategy of Seapower. And if you can pick up a copy of this, it's well worth it. The first fleet action of the war took place off Toulon in February 1744, and its indecisiveness makes it necessary to introduce a brief digression into the field of tactics. Early in that century, Rooke's fighting instructions of 1703 had been made permanent, thus elevating them to the status of sacred and immutable doctrine, from which a flag officer could only depart at his peril. Basically, if a flag officer departs from those instructions and wins, he's going to be godlike. If he loses, he's going to lose his life. It was true that one article, number 25 instructions, permitted the ordering of a general chase, but only if the enemy was already on the run. Any idea of seizing a favourable tactical opportunity, of breaking the enemy's line, or of producing a melee in which superior firepower would be decisive was wholly lacking. Professor Lewis, in his lucid analysis of the period of 1692 to 1782, has pointed out that 15 line actions were then fought without a single enemy ship being sunk or captured, and that the 6 clear-cut British victories were all of them chase battles. We may also here note that during periods of tactical sterility, such as prevailed in the mid-18th century and in the 1914-1918 war against Germany, it will be the strategic disposition of maritime forces that decides the issue, since even though the actual battles are indecisive, the pressure exerted on the enemy by blockade and by control of sea routes can be immensely influential. That is, of course, not an argument in favour of unenterprising tactics. Rather, it is an explanation of why wars throughout which tactical superiority have prevailed have nonetheless sometimes ended in success for the British cause. While we were failing to contain, let alone defeat, the Toulon fleet of 1744, the Brest fleet was able to leave harbour more or less at will, and that produced 2 highly unfavourable strategic consequences: a threat of invasion, which was frustrated by a timely gale rather than by any skill on our part, and the reinforcement of the French possessions in North America, which boded ill for the British colonialists. In 1745, however, Admiral Vernon was now in command of the Channel Fleet. Stressed the need to establish a western squadron, disposed of the entrance to the Channel. From that station it could take full advantage of the prevailing southwesterly winds, it could protect our trade and also provide the chief defence against invasion. This strategy was actually adopted by Anson 2 years later, with the most fortunate results. Also in 1745, a colonial expedition organised in Massachusetts captured Louisburg on Cape Breton Island, the key to the St. Lawrence River, and so to French Canada. And that success cast a ray of light on a period of dreary indecision and strategic incompetence. We should, however, note that our sea power in home waters was sufficiently strong to prevent French reinforcements being sent to the aid of the young Pretender, who had landed at Inverness with a few companions, and reached Derby in November 1745. Derby in November 1745, and that accomplishment possibly preserved the throne of England to the Hanoverians. The adoption of the strategically disposed Western Squadron in 1747 enabled us at last to blockade Brest effectively, and the consequence was the tide turned sharply in our favour. Hawke and Anson's substantial victories, both of them chasing actions and both named after Cape Finisterre, followed the same year. The transport of French reinforcements to Canada was entirely stopped. Their trade was brought almost to a standstill. Thus did a single well-conceived strategic measure at sea offset all the French successes on the continent, and in 1748 we were able to conclude a reasonably satisfactory treaty of the peace at Aix-la-Chapelle. But we handed back Louisburg to the French. It's a good book. Sounds good, Drew Stafford. Preserved the English throne in the hands of the Germans. It was still considered better than the Catholic Stuarts. Not because of Charles the... you have to remember, James I and Charles I were good. No, James I and Charles II were good. Okay? They were good monarchs, and this is the trouble. If you ever want a family which illustrates the phraseology of Game of Thrones in real life, in that when they are born, the gods flip a coin, and they are either heroes or they're madmen. James I was a very astute politician and very capable. Charles I was absurdly stupid when it came to certain things, especially in how he presented things. Charles II was an extremely astute and extremely capable politician. James II managed to shoot himself in the foot at every turn. And then you have the various young pretenders. Basically, the trouble with James II was he really did believe that God was on his side. And I always refer to the point, God helps those best who help themselves. And by that, it's meant that rather than sitting around waiting for God to help you, you use the talents God has already granted you, and the opportunities God has already granted you, to try and help yourself, to improve your own standing and secure yourself. That's always been my view in those scenarios and in that sort of debate. I.e., we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, we all have failings, but it's better to, in the end, to make the most of what you have got rather than wait around dreaming of what you haven't. Now, the trouble is, you can then have the view of James II that he had this idea that he was secured by God and therefore he had to worship God, and his view was the Catholic God. And the trouble is, by that point, the country had been very Protestant for a very long time. And not just Protestant, persecuted by Catholic nations, threatened by Spanish Armada, all sorts of things. Protestant. Followed by a period of republic, ruled by very, very Protestant politicians. And then you have a scenario where you have a military and armed forces and structures of government which are heavily Protestant. And James tries to turn around and goes, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my favourites in charge of all these things who all have to be Catholic. And then wonders why no one's taking their orders, and then William turns up and we have what's called a Glorious Revolution. And so we have William of Orange and Mary. Then we have a next Stuart monarch, who is the Stuart monarch on her own, who's Anne. Both Mary and Anne are absolutely spectacular monarchs and are really good at their jobs. They are some of the queens who are lesser known in British history for various reasons, but they are pretty much ignored. But they are very good at being monarchs, and they're very good at the politics of jobs. So this is where it comes down to, they're flipping the coin. And then after Anne, of course, comes the Hanoverians. As opposed to threatened by Spanish and French while England was still Catholic. Well, the thing is, it's going to sound strange. The English regularly had wars, etc., with the French while they were Catholic. But once they became Protestant, those wars took on a different term. It's going to sound strange. The war, it's kind of difference between a naval race which is a tech race versus a naval race which is a qualitative race versus a naval race which is a quantitative race. It's still the wars, but there's a different spin on them. Because now it's a case of convert or die if you lose. And so that means you're fighting not just for your mortal soul and body and land, but your immortal soul and body and land in that scenario. And that makes things a lot nastier. Convert or die is sadly encouraged in some circumstances by people, and yeah, it can cause problems. It causes a lot of problems. It turns wars into far more dangerous things than they need to be. Yeah, I need more bookshelf space. Sorry. It flashed up again in the corner of my screen. I need more bookshelf space. I'm going to have to take over my sister's office. That's the only option. I'm going to have to knock this wall out and go back and take the whole office over from my sister. Sure, the difference between kneeling before a different crown or different bishop, but they took religion seriously, or at least pretended to. Religion was... one of the interesting conversations I have had with people is when you are a historian and you look at the past and you look at the present and people say, oh, I start talking about historic freedoms. And I would honestly say we have never really been freer than we are today. Because there were so many more restrictions than you can perceive of really today. When you think of how it's like in some parts of the world, we talk about Fish Friday, which is a fairly common thing in various parts of the Christian world, eating fish one day a week. Well, in some areas that was optional. In some areas it was observed by only those who were really, really pious. And in some areas that was downright enforced, and if you ate anything but fish as your protein source on that day, you were in trouble. Well, yeah, imagine if you consider my mum is allergic to fish. Her choice basically in those days would have been to starve. You could say just have vegetables, but if you consider the quality of vegetables, etc., grown pre a lot of the work we've done now with ground, etc., and understanding them, it's not going to be much food available, or make herself deathly ill or kill herself with the fish. That's not freedom. English history is less as mark in America. No, yeah, especially East Coast states and country names: Maryland, Prince George, William and Queen Mary, Queen Anne counties to start with. Yeah. What's your sister going to do if you do that? Probably complain, but this is the thing, my sister has an office in the garden, she has it all set up, but she keeps working out of her bedroom still, because she just basically moved her stuff down to her office, and then using the freer space of her bedroom to work up there, and I just go, I'm down here. Plan this conquest wisely, sir. I will do, Richards. No, you see, what happens is I have one of the YouTube screens open on the side next to the live streaming, and it keeps reminding me there's this live stream from a channel I like going, that I like to watch live streams of, and of course that's Drac, because I like to watch his live streams. I was like, if you're taking a sister's office, wear your helmet. I will do. It's not your sister's office, it's your book annex, which you generously allowed her to use. I'm leaving a little bit of iron brew in there for just the end. Yes, it's true. Even the monumental rollbacks in the civil liberties the last few years and decades, all told, we're still free, and those elites never stop trying hard to change that. That's... I had to say no. I'm never quite sure about that, but I don't like some of the phraseology that goes round. When you say things like people voted some way because they didn't understand the reality, or you say they didn't know what they were voting for, and you undermine a vote like that, even if from the best place, if you use that phraseology, you are undermining democracy far more than you are helping it. I don't mind disagreeing with how a vote goes. That's fine. We all do. Votes go some ways one way, vote goes the other way. But don't start from a place at which you're accusing your fellow people of your fellow citizens of being stupid, or or dumb, or being fooled. Now, one interesting thing to that is I think actually some of the scenarios and discussions that have over-egged some others into thinking. One of the things that goes around is, of course, the various conspiracies of outside powers interfering in elections and pushing their own propaganda, etc. through. And once you start to look into it, you realise that's actually a very small impact, if any, because the vast majority of people make up their minds a long time before the election's called. So you're looking at the very marginal numbers of people who might change their mind. Especially once you get involved in local politics in any way, shape or form, you find most people pretty much decide which way they're going to vote by the time they reach 18, and they don't really change it, or rather the issues they're going to vote on. And that's the thing you find. When I vote, I tend to be looking for people who are giving more than 10-word answers. So I specifically do not like people who focus on just giving the catchphrase. I look for people who go, give me the 10 words after that and 10 words after that. But that's my view. That's what I do. Not really everyone wants to do that. Everyone has their own issues they want to vote on. I respect that. Fish Friday and my cooch. Fish Friday was enforced by Protestant Queen Elizabeth I in order to support fishing fleet maintain the stock of seamen. Yes. Very good. I thought Fish Friday was a Catholic thing, and otherwise was a signal against the Papists. It had many reasons were put behind it, but they were all doing the same thing. Yes, you had a surviving French Protestants escaping to England, and quite a few were descendants joining the military officers. Yes, quite a lot of the Bretons. That did help, again, with the reduction in the French forces, thanks to Louis XIV, who got rid of his own experienced sailors. And with that level of allergy, not likely to survive past childhood. Jackery, I'm playing World of Warships on my main monitor and yours stream on the another monitor. Your sister is an engineer. Annoying engineers tend to be unwise. Yes, but I have an advantage with this engineer. She's an absolutely exceptional engineer. But whenever it comes to carpentry, building, or anything like that, I'm always the one who has to do the work. So she has great ideas and great knowledge, but she doesn't actually do it. She's very good at directing a site team and all those sort of things. She's very good at all that. There's a reason she's a chartered civil engineer and a... Is it chartered surveyor? I think she's a chartered surveyor as well. Is it surveyor? I know she's got she's chartered twice by two different institutes. I think I know it's civil engineering, and I'm trying to remember is it surveying or structural engineering? I know she's going for a third one. I think it's she's a chartered the ICE and the structurals. She's chartered by the structures. I think it's surveyor she's going for as her third one. She's incredibly overly qualified for the role she does. Incredibly. It's just Copenhagen space. Yeah, that's my plan. Colin Cameron, the fish thing was enforced in England partially to boost the number of fishermen that could join the fleet in time of war, similar to the ban on football. The ban on football was supposed to encourage people to do more archery. Gina Hartman, has the Chinese aircraft carrier paid a visit to the Chinese neighbour in Djibouti? I don't think so yet. I think I honestly think a Chinese aircraft carrier entering the Indian Ocean would cause a big stir with the Indians, so I think I'd remember it. Yeah, that's the trouble. That's why you have to look for other sources to find out where they do say more than 10 words. Anuk. Lucas Jones, hello. How could someone get the Royal Navy to go for an all 15-inch 42 battle fleet in the 1922 treaty negotiations? I.e. instead of Nelson and Rodney? Oh. Basically, if they were persuaded that the American ships and the Japanese ships were going to be sufficiently fast, they needed more fast ships. Because the British looked at 15-inch and 16-inch options for it's the F-3s versus the Nelrods. And the F-3s and the Nelrods were chosen over the F-3s because it was felt that you needed more firepower. But if you needed to achieve something closer to a balance of speed, armour and firepower, you'd have gone for the 15-inch F-3s. Although they were going to be armed with 15-inch 45s. Oh no, 15-inch 50s. 15-inch 50s, not 15-inch 42s. So it would probably be going for a 15-inch 50 or 15-inch 50 fleet. As for Dining One Another, Doctor, I agree. We have far more in common as people than not. Politics is a divide, in my opinion. Politics is viciousness, I agree. Yeah, that's the thing. I have friends from across the political spectrum. I have never understood the idea of anyone saying I won't be friends with someone because of their political views. There are certain groups which I wouldn't want to be friends with. They're usually from the very far edges of either end of the spectrum. And if we consider the political spectrum sort of goes round in a circle, I would say I'm closer to sort of this area on the circle, in the sort of the centre of politics. And the extremes are down here, the authoritarian wing. And yeah, I tend to not be really hang around with those. Especially once they get onto the certain points of, and both ends up this various versions of race theory. And yeah, no. Peel away the outer covering and we're all the same underneath, and frankly I don't see the point in trying to pretend anything different. And I'd rather no one actually peel away the stuff on the outside. It's not really nice to do. It tends to let out a lot of stuff all over the floor and make a complete mess. How many active carriers do the Indians have now? I think they have 2 active carriers at the moment. Actually, let me just check that, because it might be 1 active and 1 partially active. But I think it's 2. Let's see. They have 2 aircraft carriers, the Vikrant and the Vikramaditya. And yeah, I think they're working on another one, aren't they? Aircraft carrier project. Yeah. They're working on the Vishal, which is expected to be 75,000 tons, an indigenous aircraft carrier too, also built by the Cochin shipyard. The Vikrant is in service. But they're also looking at another Vikrant class, so they could end up with 4 carriers. Yeah, always remember that a lot of these places are where people go to talk shop and look pretty important because they turn up there. Actual stuff might well not get decided there, with Davos and all that lot. Nelrod with 12 15-inch guns would not really be the option. You could do it, but it would not really be what they push for. There's a reason they're going for a 9-gun option on the 35,000 ton limit. 15-inch 50 would have used a slightly heavier shell. Yeah, it would have used a slightly heavier shell, but it would also been quite sort of powerful. The Chinese are quite used to building some quite large engines for things, if you consider for their merchant ships, etc. Yeah, they did retire the Hermes, which was, of course, I think the Virat, a few years ago, yes. So, Clarke, question. You said before that if the Soviet Union had completed Stalin class, that the BB would have retained. However, would new battleships have been built once those had worn out because of legacy issues to the opposition? Yes. Because, in nicest way, if the Soviet Union has battleships, then NATO would want to have battleships. So, I think what you might well see is the next class of battleships would be a joint battleship design. So, it would be a NATO battleship design. And you probably see the French, the British, and the Americans all combined together to build something. And so they build a uniform design orientated across the three navies, orientated on each navy. So the British would build probably a couple in the Britain, France would build a couple in France, and America would probably build 6 or so of them, maybe 8. And it would be kind of interesting because they, depending on when they're built, which probably would be about the 1960s, 1970s, there's going to be a debate about nuclear power. There's going to be a debate about missiles being fitted with them and sensors, and they could last in service a long, long time. And if you are building battleships in the 1960s, you're going to be building aircraft carriers. So CVA-1 or whatever project like that gets built. But also, I would say CVO-1 doesn't probably need to be built, because if the Soviet Union has battleships, they're probably also going to have aircraft carriers completed in time. And if they complete some aircraft carriers and they've got battleships, then probably the Maltas get finished off. Or something of similar sizing. So something bigger than CVO-1. I think today that might be a reaction if you were looking back going, why didn't they giggle and just make more aircraft carriers? But I think you have to remember that a lot of the history that we imagine it today, looking back, is retroactively justifying things. I think I've read a paper to you guys, not to all of you, guys and girls, not that long ago, just remembering my critique from a recent discussion of my teaching. Apparently I used the phrase guys too much for discussing grouping a whole group, and I just went, sorry, I didn't even think about it. It's phraseology, guys and girls. It's the thing is, the point they bring in, and the point you have to remember is that a lot of history, if we consider that book which I read the other day, the Brassies, the paper about cruisers, which basically was justifying the British cruiser policy in the 1920s and 30s, and we know the weaknesses in the British cruiser policy in the 1920s and 30s. We know what were the issues. We know there are problems, and they're just skirting over them going, oh no, this is alright because of this. A lot of the history is retroactively looking back and going, yes, of course the battleship was outdone because no one built anymore. And that's a very easy case to make, and you don't have to be a naval historian, you don't have to be any kind of really informed on naval debates or looking into the context of things to make it. So a lot of politicians have, a lot of historians, and a lot of other people who have been invited have made that point. And politicians have made that point, talking about aircraft carriers and all these things and making a case for them. However, if you have continued capital ship construction, i.e. battleships, and the Soviet Union introduces them, you will see a new generation of battleships. Yes, you will still see aircraft carriers, but the theory will be the Soviet battleships are being built with the knowledge of World War II and using that to make themselves as strong as possible. Ergo, they're using all these lessons. Ergo, they must have figured out a way to make them safe against these lessons. So ergo, we have to do the same. Carl from Gasburg, with 3-inch and 5-inch VT fuses, proximity fuses, there was a horrible harvest among Japanese planes, as well as Taffy 3 getting nasty surprises. That is another scenario to think about. The fact is, there is a lot of perception that air power had reached a point at which it could overwhelm surface ships, and this comes about quite often. People say this, oh, air power. The fact is, surface ships still remain, because usually you can have systems. And the hours were brought back in the 80s in response to the Kirov. So, it's an interesting question to get into. No, didn't get it all. It's one of those scenarios you always have to think about, in that we like to imagine we've made the right decision, so we will often retroactively justify it based on the fact that look, we must have made the right decision because of this. When at the time it's often quite a complicated decision. There is a reason Vanguard and the King George V are kept around for the time they are. There is a reason the US goes to the expense of keeping the hours. There's a reason they put the design studies they do into the Montanas, the Longtanas, and the other subsequent vessels. They're not doing this because they like to spend money. They're doing this because it's necessary. Any inside knowledge on what next on Biltrumps? We're recording it tomorrow, so you can't get inside knowledge because I have a list of topics, but usually we go into Biltrumps, which was something like 13, 15 topics. Sometimes as many as 20 topics. And we then talk about 3 or 4 of them. So I have no idea which of those topics we're going to pick. And I would say that each one of us brings a whole load of topics to the table. There's discussion of Chinese and Chinese, Indian, and American steel production. Yeah. Also, back to air power versus big guns. After World War II, accurate all-weather gun laying was a known thing. Dependable airstrike on surface vessels was not all-weather for a few years to come. There are problems. There are assumptions made because of the way history goes. It's like the assumption that technology always goes like that, when actually it goes. We only use this as a rough thing to sort of give people an idea of where it's going. But that's very much an abstract look when you're taking a long, long step back. When you're involved in it, and the actual thing is going all over the place. Then Stalin dies and the Soviet battleship threat disappears overnight. Pretty much. Are we seeing the US trying to paint China as a threat? In the nicest way, China is a threat. But that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a fact. China is a major power who has territorial ambitions, aka Taiwan, but not just limited to Taiwan. And these territorial ambitions, we consider under the current leadership, we have an idea of what's going on, but the trouble is with the kind of leadership we currently are looking at in China and Russia is that these are complex scenarios, especially when it comes to the likely succession of them. We don't know who's going to succeed them if they go, and those people could have very different personalities to the ones currently in power. And that is a potential problem. Because you leave the state you've set up, but it's no longer... It's kind of like Germany after Bismarck. Bismarck built a state that he could run, which was great for him. But when he was gone, you didn't have a Bismarck-style personality there. Germany becomes very, very problematic to run and very problematic to deal with. Well, that's a problem. When you've got states which are so much built around a personality, when they go, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen with them because of the things that could go, the different people that could take charge. And the fact that those people, by default, are probably not going to be as good at running a state built by that other personality, because that person has built a state for themselves. So, you have problems. that is a threat. That is a scenario you have to account for in defence. But it's one of those things you have to always think about the potential. I wouldn't say China's so much being painted as a threat. I'd say, honestly, occasionally the wolf warrior diplomacy paints themselves as a threat because of the way they act. Mainly because for a nation which has a history of subtlety and really intelligent and really well thought out diplomacy, wolf warrior diplomacy doesn't really show off that. It sounds good at home, as we understand it, but it's kind of such a stark change to Chinese normal subtle diplomacy that it's a bit shocking and suggests other problems might come about. Britain, we do tend to try and keep steel production going in the UK so we can maintain the ability to build ships. And you have to remember, not all steel is the same. So steel that you're talking about can be the cheapest, lowest grade of steel that people can produce versus the highest grade of steel. So which you need a lot less of, but is worth infinitely more money. So in the nicest way, China's steel production, it sounds a lot, but it's often the lowest, cheapest type of steel in the vast majority of it. Whereas when you're looking at American, British, Swedish, Japanese steel production, they usually tend to focus on the highest grade. So whilst this is not saying the Chinese can't do the highest grade, they can. They do the highest grade of steel as well. But the thing is, they also provide. They can also have the economy of scale and the way they've set the system up that it's economically viable for them to produce the lowest quality steel at vast amounts and dump it onto the world market, pretty much. Whereas for the other countries, it's not economically sustainable for them to do anything but the highest, most difficult types of steel to produce. Richards, well over 2/3, close to 3/4 of the world's steel manufacturing is offline, and the foundry is closed. 85% of German steel manufacturing is done. They make everything that makes everything else. Because I'll use the steel production as the in Dr. Clarke and Spirit of the Tech. What are your thoughts on congregated metal? The first introduction, then its application in aviation. Oh. It's introduced because it's an easy way to make thinner steel stronger and provide some sort of structural integrity to try and make it able to take loads and movement on it. And that's the same for when it's put on aircraft. It's because it's lighter and stronger. It's basically what you do before you find aluminium. So anyway, would a battleship or cruiser always have warm weather and cold weather gear for the sailors on board? They would always have something, but usually they don't have to have a lot of both, because usually they will find spaces to get it will get sent to them. But they will usually have both, some both. Yes, overcounting population is never a good way to go. Ooh. Right then, it's nearly 11 o'clock, so I am going to say... Well, I'm starting to get messages from various family members going, where am I? When am I coming in? The dogs want to go to bed. So I'm going to say... Thank you very much, Aaron. Hope you're well. I'm going to finish off the Iron Brew. That's good stuff. 1901 is very good. And next week I will actually have to say I will break my 2-can limit and actually get a bottle of 1901 for the session, as it's the 100th episode of Bruships. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Wasn't the first corrugated metal actually made of aluminium? J52 comes to mind, but I think I'm wrong. No, there were some aircraft in, I think, in Model 1 which had some corrugated steel on them. Or I might be remembering it completely wrong. But they certainly had corrugated... Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I could be going wrong. Thank you, Paul Ketron. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Stafford Thompson, Seneca Nero, Paul from Chicago, Sean, Mac, and Dan for your adminning. Thank you, thank you, Carmen Gusberg, Ruhan, Mark Harkness, Amelie. Thank you, Melanie6040 for your adminning and being on here. Thank you, Michael Cooch, Richards, Fluffkoff. Thank you, and thank you, George Newman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jack Ray, for adminning and all your the memberships. Steve Clarke, will we 3D print warships? When we've reached the level at which we can 3D print metal of that size, maybe. Maybe. Thank you, everyone. Bobassi, Citroen 2 CV typer was CV prototype was congregated. Thank you. Thank you, Richards. Thank you, Frame 15. Thank you, Yickers. Thank you, Night Security Front. So I was trying to overtake on the US in industrial capacity. As why can I not see they are in the UK? Is it just industrial capacity? It's economic capacity. And remember, industry is about a lot more than just steel these days. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have to be careful what you're talking about. And there is Mexico. And never count out the Mexican factor in the American economy. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Yes, underway replenishment will be a topic. At some point, I'm sure. Right. Toodles. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.